Okay, let's see here. Hi. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I think we'll get started. You're nice and cool inside, thank goodness. I lived in New York more than 20 years ago at this point, and this is bringing back like the summers in New York on the subway. I'll kind of never forget it. So hot. But thank you all for braving this heat wave and coming here on a Saturday afternoon. We're really excited. This is actually the 5th year we've done the Female Founders Conference, and our first time in New York. So I'm very happy to be here and have you all here. So I'm Jessica Livingston. I co-founded Y Combinator, which was the first accelerator. Today there are thousands all over the world, at least hundreds all over the world. But in 2005, what we were doing was so unusual that people in Silicon Valley just regarded us as very irrelevant. Y Combinator began the same way as most other startups, with a hypothesis about something we thought people wanted. And it turns out they did want it, and we grew and grew. Now we've funded more than 1,800 startups with a total value of over $100 billion. Woo. So having myself been through the kind of startup journey that many of you are hoping to, I wanted to tell you my own story. Now, if you only know me through the media, you might get the impression that my contribution to Y Combinator is that I'm Paul Graham's wife. And while I love being his wife, there is a little bit more to the story than that. So I was born in Minneapolis in 1971. Later that year, my mother left home, leaving my father alone with a small baby. So he took me back to Boston, where my grandmother lived, and I lived with my grandmother during the week while my dad worked, and I lived with my dad on weekends. My grandmother was the most important female role model in my life. She was a very independent person, and the term anyone who knew her would use to describe her is free-spirited. For example, in the wintertime after putting me to bed, she'd go out and work till late in the evening on these giant ice sculptures that she'd build in our front yard. She did what she wanted, and she didn't care if people thought she was unconventional. So despite growing up without a mother, my childhood was really happy. My dad made a lot of sacrifices so I could get a great education, and he constantly encouraged me. I played soccer when I was younger, and when I was in the 9th grade, we had an away game at a school called Phillips Academy in Andover, Mass. And the place seemed so unbelievably fabulous that I decided right there on the spot that I was going to go to school there. Little did I know, though, that this decision would have bittersweet consequences. In my old school, I'd been a big fish in a small pond. I was a straight-A student and good at sports. And when I got to Andover in the fall of 1986, it seemed like everyone was straight-A students and good at sports. So I got really discouraged and basically gave up. I defaulted to being a mediocre student and did nothing impressive or noteworthy for the next decade. It was like my own personal dark ages. And it's a bit embarrassing to reflect on, to be honest with you, but I think it's important to mention because when journalists and biographers write about successful founders, they often focus on early predictors of success in people's formative years. And for me, you know, I didn't have these things, and I didn't at least have any of the conventional kind of predictors, and no one would have voted me most likely to succeed. But while I had no achievements, I did have 3 defining characteristics when I was younger that were critical in making Y Combinator work. The first was the quality that caused my YC co-founders to nickname me the social radar. I was one of those kids you just couldn't get anything past. If something seemed off or out of character, I noticed and made inquiries. I was always trying to figure things out based on subtle social cues. The second was that I never liked being at the mercy of anyone else. I hated anyone telling me what to do or not to do. Parents, teachers, bosses, people I had to collaborate with but disagreed with, anyone. And the third distinctive thing about me was that I've pretty much always been a straight shooter. My grandmother and my father were both like that, but I'll come back to those in a minute. The day after I graduated from college, my beloved grandmother died, and it was a really sad and lonely time in my life. And now I was supposed to find a job with a degree in English and absolutely no clue what I wanted to do. I wound up getting a job at Fidelity Investments in their customer service group, answering calls from 3:30 till midnight every day, basically talking to retail investors about why their Magellan account was down that day. Oh, it was awful. I didn't love the job, but I did love having a job, working hard and getting paid for it, and not having homework hanging over my head. It was great. And after Fidelity, I worked in investor relations in New York City, then at Food and Wine magazine, and at an automotive consulting firm. And I even worked briefly for a wedding planner. In 2003, I was working in the marketing department at an investment bank in Boston when I first met Paul Graham at a party at his house one night. We started dating, and I felt like I finally had met Mr. Right. Despite having quite different backgrounds, we were really similar. If I thought I never wanted to be at the mercy of someone else, Paul was that dialed up to 11. He'd moved back to Cambridge after selling his startup ViaWeb to Yahoo, and he was at the time writing essays, working on programming languages, publishing a book, and curing his debilitating fear of flying by learning to hang glide, of all things. Paul is the best problem solver I've ever met. He's also a genius at expanding ideas and making radical improvements to things. One of his defining characteristics is telling people, you know what you should do. If you know him, you'd find that very funny. I'm sure he'd say it to you. Paul and his circle of friends exposed me to this new world of startups, and it felt much more exciting than the later stage of publicly traded companies that I was involved with at the investment bank. I read the book Startup by Jerry Kaplan about his pen computing company called Go, and I was just immediately hooked. It was like some light shining down from the heavens. And I wanted to hear more stories about the early days of startups. So I started working on a book of interviews with startup founders, and the book was called Founders at Work, and it was published in 2007. At the same time I was becoming more interested in startups, I was becoming less interested in my job. The bubble had burst a few years back, and the investment bank was making some pretty drastic cutbacks, and working there just had become boring and unpleasant. So I applied for a job at a venture capital firm where I felt like I might be one step closer to this exciting world of startups. And while I was interviewing at the VC firm, Paul would, you know what you should do me each night at dinner, telling me how I should change the VC business once I got into it. We'd talk for hours about how broken early stage funding was, and most importantly, how more people would start startups if it could be made easier for them. So as the VC firm took longer and longer to decide to hire me, the ideas grew more and more compelling, until one night Paul just said, let's just start our own. The next day, we convinced Paul's co-founders from ViaWeb, Robert and Trevor, to join us part-time. And the initial plan was that they would pick and advise the startups, and I would do everything else. Instead of giving large amounts of money to small numbers of established companies, like traditional VCs did, we'd give small amounts of money to large numbers of earlier stage startups, and then we'd give them a lot of help. And our initial target audience was programmers who we felt could handle the technical aspects of a startup, but were clueless about everything else, just like Paul, Robert, and Trevor had been. We also had more faith in young founders than most investors did back then. I mean, this was back in the days when Google's VCs had insisted that the founders hire an outside CEO as a condition of their Series A round. So none of us had any experience angel investing, though. And that's where the idea of funding startups in batches came from. We decided to fund a whole bunch of startups at once during the summer so that we could learn how to be investors. In March 2005, we launched Y Combinator's website and invited people to apply for what we called the Summer Founders Program. We funded 8 startups that summer, and we recognized almost immediately the power of investing in batches. It was so much better for the founders. They had colleagues to help them during a time that had previously been a very lonely process. But it was also a much more efficient way for us to help the startups because we could do things for them all at once. Every Tuesday night, Paul cooked dinner for them, and at each dinner, we brought in a guest speaker to teach the founders about startups. Paul talked to all the startups about what they were building, and I helped get them all incorporated as C corporations. And this was a really big deal in those days, actually, because back then, to become a C corp, you had to pay a lawyer like $15,000 to do this for you. The first summer, we gave the startups $6,000 per founder, which was based on the stipend that MIT gave their grad students during the summer. At the end of the summer, we hosted Demo Day for an audience of about 15 investors, which we were very excited about. Reddit was in that first batch, and the founders of Twitch, although they were working on a different idea, and Sam Altman's geolocation startup. And though we only had tried funding a batch of startups as a way to learn how to be investors, we realized within a couple of weeks that we were onto something promising. So we decided to do all of our investing in batches. And we also decided that we'd fund the next batch in Silicon Valley. We knew that a lot of people would copy us, and we didn't want someone else to be the Y Combinator of Silicon Valley. Like, we wanted to be that ourselves. So despite the fact that we've grown significantly over the past 13 years, and we've expanded in a lot of different ways, YC's core program is remarkably similar to what it was in 2005. So the question I always used to get over the years from people was, so what is your role at YC? And it used to really bug me because no one ever asked Paul, Robert, or Trevor that question. But now I think it's kind of an interesting question to think about. What was my role as the only non-technical founder of Y Combinator? Well, at the beginning, there were tons of errands, like with any startup that just had to get done and there was no one else to do them. Paul and I divided up responsibilities perfectly, which I think is very important if you happen to start a startup with your spouse or your partner. He made our website and application, and I got all the other stuff set up for the first summer. I worked with the lawyers to set up Y Combinator, the entity, and to help create all kinds of template legal paperwork for our standard investments and everything the founders would need to set up their companies and assign stock properly. And if you've ever done that, you know it's a lot of paperwork to do. And I had to learn quickly about how to advise them on filling everything out so that they wouldn't have to pay the legal fees. I had to set up Paul's small office building in Cambridge to be our weekly dinner gathering space for 25 people. I set up our bank account, and I contacted people to speak at our dinners every week. I bought the groceries that Paul cooked for the dinners. I even delivered air conditioners that I bought at Home Depot to the founders. I mean, I was really the only one of us organized enough to make all this kind of stuff happen. When it came to investing, I had something that my co-founders didn't have. I was the social radar. I couldn't judge our applicants' technical ability or even most of their ideas. My co-founders were experts at those things. I looked at qualities of the applicants that my co-founders couldn't see. Did they seem earnest? Did they seem determined? Were they flexible-minded? And most importantly, what was the relationship between the co-founders like? While my partners discussed the idea with the applicants, I usually sat observing silently. And afterward, they'd turn to me and ask, should we fund them? From the beginning, I was very careful about only funding earnest people. Back then, I never envisioned that the people we funded would grow into this community of thousands of YC alumni, but I always tried to create an asshole-free culture. If I could tell someone was a conceited asshole, we did not fund them. And I'm sure we've since funded some conceited assholes, but early on I was pretty rigid about this. And I think that's the basis of the culture of our alumni community. So far, this stuff might sound a bit different than you'd expect in a successful investor. But when you get to an extreme in something, things get qualitatively different. Y Combinator was a new extreme in the venture funding business. So what made someone a good investor was different. VCs relied on growth figures and estimates of market sizes, but those didn't exist at the stage that we were investing. What YC needed was deeply technical people to judge the potential of an idea, and then someone like me to understand the founders' characters and the relationships between them. And to do that well, you needed abilities that had previously not been considered important as an investor. It was doubly hard, too, because some of the applicants were so young. We had to judge the founders not by what they were, but what they could turn into. I mean, imagine Mark Zuckerberg back in his dorm room in 2004 with his website that let college students see what other students at the school were doing. Not super impressive seeming to traditional investors. Another secret weapon of mine that was strangely well suited to Y Combinator was that I was a very experienced event planner. Events are a crucial part of what YC does. When you fund startups in batches, everything's an event. Interviews are an event. Each dinner is an event. Demo day is an event. As the alumni network grew, we started doing events for alumni too. And from the very first year, we did big events like Startup School. I'd been doing events for years in my marketing job, so I could plan these things with one hand behind my back. Probably the thing that was most different about YC as an investment firm, though, was that it felt like a family, and I was its mom. I was soft and sensitive at a time when investors tended to be hardened and aggressive. And I'll throw in ruthless, too, for a couple of them that I know. I cared about how founders were feeling, if they were overwhelmed, if they were eating properly. I'd counsel them on relationships that were under strain due to the pressure of a startup. And I'd listen at length and help them with their co-founder disputes and breakups. Starting a startup is emotionally draining for founders, especially in the beginning. Sometimes they just needed someone to listen. And luckily, my entire college career had trained me on listening to people's social problems. And I tried to always be a straight shooter with my advice. In fact, we all were. Paul is the straightest shooter I know, which is why his advice is so valuable. He doesn't bury it in euphemisms, or worse, like withhold the truth in order to preserve people's feelings. And as tough as they might have found his advice at the time, founders always thank him for his candor. One thing Paul and I had in common was that we were not driven by money. We were interested in startups, and we wanted to help people start more of them. And that was the basis for everything we did at YC. And it was what allowed us to do something as weird as YC in the first place. And because YC didn't have any LPs at the time, we weren't even constrained by a vague fiduciary responsibility to anyone. And that allowed us to take more risks with who we chose to fund. And it also allowed us to be benevolent to failing startups. And that often brought us into conflict with investors who had different priorities. Early on, we had funded a husband and wife team who had a baby. And they worked hard on their startup, but it was clearly failing. One of their investors tried to get them acqui-hired by a big company in the Valley who ultimately passed. Paul talked to the founders and learned that they just wanted the security of jobs, so they could take a break from the constant stress of a startup. So we talked to the big company and got one of them hired there. And the founders were delighted. The investor, on the other hand, was livid. He ripped into Paul harder than almost anyone I've ever seen, before Twitter, saying that Paul had blown any chance of an acqui-hire. And, to this day, I still don't get why investors squeeze founders over small outcomes like this. I also never cared much about fame or my own personal brand. I just wanted Y Combinator to succeed. One thing I've learned from Y Combinator is that the most successful startups grow organically out of the founders' lives. And this is true in my case, too. I was almost uncannily well-suited for the kind of work that it took to make YC successful. But the things that made me well-suited for it were so far from the qualities that most people associate with startup founders. I'll list them. Oh my gosh, have I been turning that? Okay, sorry, I got so into my talk. Oh, you're doing it. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to list the qualities. Pardon that little. Okay, wait, back. Okay, I'm going to list them so you can see for yourself. I was a social radar, a good event planner, maternal, empathetic, a straight shooter, and not driven by money or fame. Think how far that is from the profile of the typical startup founder you read in the press. I mean, maternal? Since when was that an important quality in a startup founder, let alone the founder of an investment firm? Yet it was critical in making YC what it is. And by the way, this photo was taken just about the same time that I wrote Airbnb their first investment check. So that's why I wanted to share with you my story. It's not true that every person can start every startup, but a lot more people have what it takes to start some startup than realize it. And a lot of people, perhaps all people, have some unique combination of abilities and interests. And a lot of these combinations match some startup idea. So if you want to start a startup, I recommend you try asking yourself, what's distinctive about you? What unique combination of abilities and interests do you have? And don't edit your answers, because as you can see from my example, the most unlikely ingredients can often be the key to the recipe. In fact, it may even be that the strangest combination of qualities are the most valuable. I had a weird combination of qualities, but they matched YC because it was such a weird company. And the most successful startups do tend to be weird. They're usually such outliers that they seem preposterous at first to everyone except the founders, because the company has grown out of their own experiences. Okay, so what can you learn from my story? Here are 9 things. I'm going to try to do this smoothly. Okay, 9 things. There's no one successful mold for a successful founder. Just because you might only see a certain type in the news, that doesn't mean you need to turn yourself into that. Do what you're genuinely interested in and try to play to your natural strengths. A startup is so much work that you'll give up if you're not genuinely interested in it. Don't pay attention to the mainstream's opinion of what you're doing. Whether it's your skills, your idea, or whatever, unless they're your users, their opinion does not matter. Although do pay attention to the opinion of your users. They're important. Like YC. We agreed on the big questions, and we each deferred to each other's expertise on the small ones. Focus on making something people want. Everything follows from that. In 2005, people needed a way to get a small amount of funding easily. Don't let rejection distract you or hold you back. You'll get rejected in so many different ways, but you must just keep moving forward. Start small so you can be nimble and open to change. We never could have pulled off moving our operations out to Silicon Valley in a matter of months if we had hired people in Cambridge, for example. And to this day, YC has a tradition of trying things out on a small scale before expanding them. It's okay not to have gone to an elite college. I grew up thinking that this was the be-all, end-all. You've been trained to believe that you'll be judged by your credentials. But in a startup, it's the users who judge you, and they don't care about your credentials, they care about your product. Lastly, be intrepid. There's room for lots of different types of people to be startup founders, but you do need a certain amount of boldness to work on ideas that most people would consider stupid and to keep going when you're ridiculed or ignored. Okay, let's see. Where am I? Here we go. Last slide. You are a jigsaw puzzle piece of a certain shape. You could change your shape to fit an existing hole in the world. That was the traditional plan. But there's another way that can often be better for you and for the world. To grow a new puzzle around you. That's what I did, and I was a pretty weird shaped piece. So if I can do it, there's more hope for you than you realize. Thank you very much. So, thank you. So, Kat's coming up.
All right, come on down. Hi, everyone. I'm Kat Manialik. I'm one of the partners at Y Combinator, and I'm really excited to be kicking off this fireside with Kathryn Minshew and Alex Cavoulacos? Yes, yes. The co-founders of the Muse. The Muse was a company that went through Y Combinator in winter 2012, and they're based out of New York. So before we get started, can each of you give us a quick introduction on yourselves and the Muse?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Kathryn Minshew, co-founder of the Muse and CEO.
I'm Alex Cavoulacos, co-founder and president.
And when we describe the Muse, it's a company that's all about helping people navigate their careers and connect with companies more authentically to find the right fit. So today we have 50 million people every year, actually quite a bit more than that, but more than 50 million people who use themuse.com, and hundreds of the best companies around the world, from Facebook, Dropbox, Slack, to Johnson & Johnson, Capital One, Goldman Sachs, that are really all about telling a more authentic story and using that to hire people who genuinely want what they're offering. And we have about 120 employees now based here in New York City, so both with our clients and with the Muse itself, we've gone through a lot of the good, bad, and ugly of hiring.
So today we're going to focus on people. It's all about the people. So let's talk about hiring as a force for culture. So at a high level, why is this important?
This is really important both for individuals and for companies. So for companies, if you have the right people, that is what makes or breaks whether you're going to be successful, particularly in a startup where you only have so many bodies to do the things that you need to do. But for an individual, you are spending more hours at work than you ever did in the past. It's such a huge part of your identity, especially here in New York or on the West Coast. The first question you're going to get when you meet someone is, what do you do? And whether that is something that resonates with you, that aligns with what you want to be doing or not, is actually hugely important. And so the industry has not caught up with the changes, with the future of work, and we believe that it really needs to.
We also think a lot about finding the right fit for you, and I think that's particularly important for startups, because every startup is so different, right? They have different cultures than each other. They have different cultures than a large company for sure. And I think that we live in a culture these days that's obsessed with, the best places to work list, or sort of ranking companies, rating them from 1 to 5 stars. But one of our really deep beliefs is it's all about alignment, not ratings. It's about what is the right thing for you. And so we'll talk more about this, but I think when you're a startup founder, one of the most important things you can do early on is really identify what is the culture you're trying to build, what are the characteristics of the company that you want to create, and how do you kind of broadcast that, loud and proud, so that people who want that will be drawn to your company, and people who don't want that will say, no thanks, and they'll go find somewhere else to work.
So let's start with hiring. So many people in the audience, so how many of you have already started a startup? All right.
Way to go.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So many of you might be thinking about hiring your first employee or your first few employees. So how do you know who the right person or first few people to bring on are?
I think one of the biggest things when you're hiring is you have to know what you're looking for. And that's a mix of skills and values. And so you might be like, okay, I need a salesperson, they need to be able to close a deal, great, but what are the values that are core to your company as well? And then how is your process allowing you to actually figure that out? Especially early stage, especially if you haven't really interviewed a ton prior to starting a company. A lot of people just jump into it and they're like, they go with their gut feeling and they're like, I think this person can do the job. But you really actually need to set up a process. And it can be a lot less arduous in the early days than it is if you get bigger, but what are you gonna ask for every single person going through the process? How are you going to compare them head to head? How are you going to check their skills? Are you doing reference checks? You should be doing reference checks, all of those things, and actually just thinking through the process at the beginning and identifying what you want, because there are many types of salespeople, many types of marketers, many types of engineers. You don't just want an engineer or a salesperson. You want one with a particular skill set to make your company successful.
So would you be willing to share some stories of mistakes you made at the Muse early on when it comes to hiring?
Yeah, so first of all, we made so many mistakes in the early days when it comes to hiring. And I think one of the sort of ever-present truths of startups is that everyone makes mistakes, you too will make mistakes, and what separates the mistakes that are painful but survivable and the mistakes that kill you is how quickly you identify them and how quickly you move to remedy them. So I'll give you kind of 2 examples of early Muse hiring mistakes. One was sort of not doing what Alex just talked about and vetting for values and mission alignment when you're hiring. So when we started the Muse, we were nobody wanted to join the company, nobody wanted to fund us. I think we've got a picture. So this is a picture from after our YC interview in November 2011, and we were beaming ear to ear because it was actually the first VC pitch in months at which people hadn't basically just laughed us out of the room. And so we were kind of very used to the only few people that were interested in working at the Muse were people that were deeply passionate about the mission and deeply aligned with the values that we had. All of a sudden, we get into YC, that news becomes public, and we had all of these people wanting to work for us. We didn't realize a lot of them actually just wanted to work for a YC startup. They wanted to work for a company they perceived as sexy. They didn't actually want to work for us. So one of our first hires was an engineer. I'll call him Bruce because we've never hired a Bruce. And and he said all the right things. He seemed so passionate. He was also in San Francisco, where we had just moved to do Y Combinator. He was ready to start the next day. And so, he seemed to check all the boxes. We hired him. We jumped right in. At the time, Alex now codes and has been, ran product through the first, 5 years of the business. But at the time, neither of us were incredibly technical, so we thought this is a great solution. And it was great for exactly 7 weeks until he shows up one morning after, I will say, I had sold $25,000 of the Muse's first product to our early customers. And he says, hey, I want to talk. I want to be a co-founder. I want more money. I want more equity. I want to be the one that they talk about in TechCrunch. And I'm not writing a single line of code until you give me these things. Now, we're pretty low drama, so we don't have a lot of tolerance for people bringing drama.
And this is also only a few weeks before demo day. So in terms of holding this over our head, we were really being put between a rock and a hard place.
Without going into all the gory details, we had a couple of quick conversations, and then we're pretty much like, great, well, it sounds like you should work somewhere else, and we should find another person to partner with, because obviously that's not an example of shared values. And, the thing is, again, you're going to deal with a lot of crazy things in startups. I think we were lucky that we had the YC community who was able to hook us up with somebody else. We paid more than $25,000 of that revenue to build that early product, but we did get to a place where we were able to launch with Demo Day, with these customers, with a working product. But it was a really big lesson for us, because I think there were a lot of signs early on that this person was just attracted by the shininess of a startup, of YC. That said, you can make the opposite mistake, which we did about a year later, which is get people who are so into your mission and so into what you're doing that they don't actually want to do the job that you're hiring for, which, again, is a real problem. So just the quick version of that story is that I did our early sales, right? Because when you're 5 people in a room, actually I think 3 or 4 people in a room, and it's like, okay, we need to go talk to customers, like nose goes, it was me. So I sold our first probably about 35 or 40 companies who were hiring partners of the Muse. And when we needed to then hire our first salespeople, we found people who loved what we were doing. They were so passionate. They wanted to be part of the Muse. They did not actually want to do sales. They did not want to do sales calls. They did not want to, do cold outreach. And unfortunately, you got to do that in sales. And so that was another painful lesson. And now I think we have just a much more thoughtful, structured hiring process where we try and assess, to the extent that it's possible to do so, how quickly can this person get up to speed? How much do they have the skills and the desire to do the role? How much are they values aligned, mission aligned? And the last thing I'll say is nobody is perfect. So unfortunately, it's kind of a harsh rule of thumb, but if you have sort of for every 10 people you've hired, if there's not one person that you're either managing out or firing, you're probably being too soft on performance. Thank you. And maybe more than that. That's like really the baseline.
So a lot of companies have started to talk about diversity and inclusion. So what is one thing that founders in the audience can do to sort of improve what they're doing in that space?
Great question. So one of the things I have actively fight against is the notion of sort of culture fit in interviewing. I do think there's culture and different ways to think about how culture evolves, but culture fit, especially for people who are not skilled interviewers, have not done it for a long time, is an amazing force for bias.
Can you talk a little bit about what culture fit interviewing is?
Yeah, so often in an interview process, someone will meet, and the question is, say, would this person be a good fit for our company? So they'll go and they'll interview them, they'll talk to them, they'll come out of it, and they'll be like, yes, this person's a culture fit, or no, this person is not a culture fit. And if you have not, as a founder, identified actually what culture fit means, what you get is this someone I'm comfortable around?
Would I hang out with them?
Get a beer with them, right? And so that is you not only find bias against, I found both in terms of introverted people oftentimes interview less well for culture fit, but also any sort of community of color, if you are a white team, any sort of women, if you are a male team, whatever you are, you look and you are more comfortable with people who are like you, who have your background, who joke about the same movies, who travel to the same places, whatever that might be. And so when people interview at the Muse, and I hear someone, usually someone who's newer to the company, is interviewing maybe one of their first rounds of interviews and says this person's not a culture fit, I get to ask, great, which of the values were you concerned about? And if they can point to one of them, absolutely, let's talk about what it was that came up in the interview that made them wonder. But if they can't point to it, then that actually, I don't care. The fact that you didn't click with them is not a prereq. The fact that you're not good friends and want to buddy up with them is not a prereq to work here. I often have to tell very extroverted people, being extroverted is not a prereq to work here, because that's often a place where you will find bias. The other thing I would say is starting day one and really valuing that and putting that into your process, because the larger the company gets, the harder it is to change the culture, the harder it is to become inclusive if you're not, the harder it is to become more diverse and have a more diverse team, which breeds success. There's so much research on it. And so if you are truly committed to it from the beginning, that's actually a competitive advantage.
So you've both talked a lot about how important culture and values alignment is for people who work within your company. Mm-hmm. But what about people that you work with, that are external to your company? So investors that you might bring on or partners. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think shared values is just as important for the people outside your company than in it. And it's always been really important to Alex and I because we started a company together before the Muse that failed really painfully, like in a ball of flames because of co-founder issues. Really and because, of a total lack of shared sort of values and ethics. And I love when Jessica said, find someone who has a similar moral compass, because you might think like, we can make it work, but like, oh my God, no.
You cannot make it work.
Exactly. I mean, we've even held the shared values test to clients.
We've had a couple of clients, and one in particular I think of right now, that we ended up firing a client for just not working well and treating people well, and sort of did what you would do is have a conversation, give the feedback, say this isn't acceptable. You get the absolutely, totally understand, won't do it again. They did it again. We returned their money and decided not to work with them. And it's a hard thing to do, but I think values are only so important and only are real if they're difficult choices.
Yeah.
Right.
And on top of that, I think one of the most challenging things for early stage founders is to think about how that applies to your investors, because, I wish that the early Muse company had lived in a world where we got to pick and choose all of our investors. We're actually very lucky in our Series A and our Series B. We had multiple term sheets. We had a lot of different options. And so for those, I did 8 different reference checks on all of the investors that I was seriously considering to lead both of those rounds. And I was really happy with the people we were able to pick. But for our seed round, I was basically like walking around New York and Silicon Valley like Oliver Twist, being like, please, sir, can I have some more? And I mean, really, we are...
It doesn't matter how small the check is, we'll take it.
Yeah, I mean, we raised our first $1.2 million. It took over a year. It took about 13 or 14 months. We had one 300K check size, 2 100K checks, and the remaining, like $700,000 was basically made of like 50K, 25K, 10K. It was brutally hard. And we actually faced a really interesting situation, which some people might know about, where we had an investor who actually was a seed investor in 2012, who came back in 2013, offered to write us a huge check, and right at the end of the process, basically propositioned me for sex. So we had to, sit there, and the way that process had gone, the other fund had drawn it out so that we were actually down to about 2 months left of cash. When we got the term sheet, we had
plenty of time,
5-6 months left of cash. We had multiple options. We had signed a term sheet. We were, down at the we thought the money was going to be wired into our account any day. And we ultimately made the decision to walk away from that entirely. Through literally a miracle, I raised $750,000 in 5 weeks.
From scratch.
Honestly, I don't think I could do that again.
We don't recommend it.
Yeah, thank you. It was surreal, but I think that that also made me a really even more passionate advocate for shared values with everyone I work with, and actually was really powerful in, earlier this year, March or so, to be able to talk about it in Fortune, and the guy ended up stepping down from his post because it turns out he was literally doing it to someone 6 months before the article came out. Same old thing, and I think that's why it's not only important to make those decisions on who you work with, but I actually think when people really cross the line, it's also important to stand up and tell others because that's the only way that we're going to change the industry.
Thank you for sharing that story. I mean, I think it is really important, and so many stories have come out in the past year, and I'm so grateful to all the women, and you included, that have been brave enough to do that, because I'm sure there are so many more stories out there, and hopefully you're helping, bring forth a future where this doesn't happen to anyone. We are almost out of time. We have a couple minutes left. But to wrap it up, let's talk about one blind spot that you think every early stage founder should be aware of as their company grows.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that has been most fascinating to me, because we're now 120 people, 6 years old, is in the early days, you sort of understand that your culture is kind of an average of your personalities, of your values, sort of as founders, how much of an influence you have. And then as our company grew, I think we genuinely believed, now there's so many more people that influence it. And then as we got even bigger, we realized, nope, that's still true, for better and for worse. The things that I'm proud of about us, I think are such a huge part of our culture to draw, and people can identify just walking into the room, but also the things that we've had to work on as founders, things that are our own personal weak spots, are things that are also weak spots for the company. And so as you not just hire, but think about how you grow as a company, take those into account, because you will be such a huge influence on your company, not just when it's small, but throughout the entire lifetime.
Yeah, and I'll give you an example of that, which is, I think that when Alex and I started the Muse, we really wanted to build a company that treated people with respect. We have a very strong no assholes culture that we hire, fire, and promote against. But personally, I struggled in the early days of the Muse a lot with giving candid, direct feedback. And I've worked on that. I've gotten a lot better. What is it? Radical Candor, great book, if you too suffer this affliction. But it is really humbling and also really painful to all of a sudden look around and realize you have a 90-person company that is collectively bad at giving direct, honest feedback because you personally are bad at it, and somehow that's just replicated and morphed itself across an organization. And it's much harder to change 90 people than it is to change yourself. And so I can't tell you how many things you can look at the Muse right now, and you can trace a lot of the good things, but you can also trace a lot of the challenges to things that maybe we weren't as good at personally. And I think that the more you're aware of that, the easier it is to actively have other people say, look, this is something I'm good at. Can you help me counteract this in our culture? Can you help me make sure that we don't build a team that suffers this same flaw at scale?
The one other thing I'd say in terms of can be a blind spot, and seeing rooms like this and having so many more female founders than there were when we started the Muse, hopefully will change this. But know that you can start a company that is the reflection of what you want to build and doesn't have to be what everyone else is building. In terms of what you do, how you do it, how you approach it, there's such a range. And there's companies in New York that we know well who've grown really quickly. Been like, wow, I have no idea how they're growing so fast. And then I get to learn more about the inside, and I'm horrified. I'm like, I would never run that company. And you know what? You do you, but the way that you want to do it, I think, is okay, right? And staying true to who you are, there are people who are going to want to work as part of that and be a part of that culture, and that's going to be refreshing compared to a lot of other environments. So don't let the sort of model that be the one that you think you have to fit into.
Yeah, the rejection that Jessica was talking about, it's not only people rejecting sometimes your idea or telling you no for funding, but it's also people saying, oh, if you try and build your company like that, it'll never work. And we made decisions early on. We have a baby at work policy. In fact, Alex's daughter is somewhere in the back.
She's in the back, yeah.
Probably asleep.
No, she's watching.
Hey. But I think we were told over and over again, like, you can't do that. You can't build a company that does that and make it work. And it does sometimes mean it's harder. But I think that if it's something really important to you, of course, learn as many lessons. We learned so much from other founders about the mistakes to avoid, how to build faster. But I also think that there's not one right way, especially when that one right way is often, a bunch of dudes basically deciding what they think the best possible company is. And there's real power in just owning what you believe is right and then just fucking doing it.
That is awesome. Thank you so much to both of you.
Thanks, Kat.
I'm going to do a bit of furniture moving. You're going to have the back of my face, but hopefully then you'll be able to see our speaker's actual face. So let's bring that here. Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Kirsty Nathu. I'm one of the partners at Y Combinator. And it is my great honor to introduce Shan-Lyn who's the CEO of Zola. And Zola has reinvented the wedding gift registry, and they've now worked with hundreds of thousands of different couples, and has latest reported valuations for the company of over $600 million. So welcome. So I gave a brief description there of what you do, but I'm sure you do it 100 times better than me. So why don't you say a little bit more about what it is and what brought you to that point?
Sure. Maybe I can start by getting a show of hands of who here has used Zola either as someone getting married or someone going to a wedding. Great. Well, thank you to you all. And for those of you who aren't as familiar, Zola is the fastest growing wedding registry and also one of the fastest growing wedding companies and e-commerce sites in the country. We use design and technology to really reimagine what it's like for couples getting married today to plan their entire wedding, and we look to serve couples from the day they get engaged through that first year of marriage. people getting married today are the millennial generation, and they're unlike any other generation. They want different things, and so we are really the only place where couples can register for things they truly want, no matter who they are, where they live, or whatever device they live on.
So what drew you to weddings?
Well, like many successful startups, we started Zola really out of personal need. So 2013, which was the year that I started it with my co-founder, that was also the year that all my best friends were getting married at exactly the same time. Yeah, sounds like many of us have had that year here. And you're going to a lot of weddings and you're buying a lot of gifts from really painful wedding registries often. So I was doing that in 2013, and I was so frustrated because my friends were registered at the traditional department store registries, and I had worked in e-commerce for a long time, and I thought that buying from their registries was the most painful e-commerce shopping experience I had ever seen. I started talking to my co-founder, Nobu, who was the head of the user experience design team at Gilt, and we had worked together at Gilt for a very long time, and he's married. And he started complaining about how bad it was from the couple side, where he really wanted to register for not just products, but experiences and cash. He couldn't do that. He wanted to enable group gifting. He couldn't do that. He wanted to personalize his registry. He couldn't do that. And so the more we talked about it, the more we realized this was an opportunity, and we were the best possible people to solve it.
And so what was it about it that made you jump into being a founder from, a relatively stable job and everything else to make you take that leap into the unknown?
Well, my background and my co-founder's background is really in product management. So we went through a very traditional product development process before we decided we really wanted to commit to doing this 24/7. And the process was we would start to talk to any engaged person that we could find, any friend or friend of a friend. We would meet them, understand their experience, their pain points, and then go away and try to design and innovate on how we could improve their wedding registry experience. So in the 2013, we thought there's really three things that kept coming up again and again. Couples really do want to register for products and experiences and cash all in the one registry. Couldn't do that anywhere else. Couples, secondly, really do want to fully personalize their registry. Couldn't do that anywhere else. And in a world where, on average, in the country, people spend $35,000 on one wedding day, which is the average yearly income, they really care what it looks like, and they want the registry to reflect that. And then third, we heard again and again, the worst part about registry from couples was they wanted to control when their gifts were sent to them, and they didn't want to receive anything before they were ready. And for most couples, this actually means they don't want anything until after their wedding date. So we started designing this concept for Zola based on these three differentiators. We would put prototypes in front of users. We would ask them to walk us through the designs. And over the course of a few months, we would wait and try not to sell them or lead them. We would wait for the brides-to-be to ask us the magic question, which is, in the product world, it is, when can I use this product? And it's really hard because you really want to pitch them on how great your product is, but we tried not to. And we didn't hear that for a few months, and it was only after we started to hear brides who were getting married the following year say to us, will this be ready in time for my own wedding? Can I use this anytime soon, or can you email me when I can sign up? That's when we knew we had a winning product, and that's when we committed to doing it 100%.
Wow, that's exciting. That's like the full-on process before taking the jump is a good way to do it. So, we see a lot of wedding startups applying to us. There's lots out there. We're in an age where retailers generally are struggling. So what do you think it is about Zola that's made it so successful?
So when we were thinking about Zola as an idea, we thought that we could produce a product that was different and that users really loved. But just as important to that was, it was important to me that we have a business model that works. And I think that has been our biggest competitive advantage. And that's the reason why we've been able to survive and thrive where most other wedding startups have closed in the years that we've been around. And this was really based from my experience at Gilt. So I worked at Gilt during the first 4 years of the business in product and saw a lot about what worked really well to drive that huge growth from $0 in revenue to over $600 million in revenue in 4 years. And I also saw what ultimately did not work, which led to the decline and meant that it could never really be a profitable, sustainable company. And we looked at what are those problems at Gilt, which are typical e-commerce problems, and how can we solve them at Zola. So, for example, the things we learned were, one, in e-commerce, returns are the silent killer. You hear laughs from anyone who's worked in an e-commerce business. You don't quite realize it when you're first starting until you're halfway into the business. You're like, oh, these returns are brutal to the business model. And the way that we were able to address that at Zola is through this feature where we don't actually send anything until people tell us they actually want to receive it. And through the registry, people can do virtual returns. So they exchange things through our app or through our site before they ever get it shipped out to them. And that has meant we have virtually no returns. One of the other killers in e-commerce is inventory. And we were able to address that by building our back-end technology that enables us to drop ship products from our partner warehouses directly to our couples. And by not taking in product into our warehouse and then shipping it out, again, that meant that we were able to be much more capital efficient and just ultimately a more sustainable business than the normal e-commerce business. And then the last thing I'll say around e-commerce businesses is that they're very hard to forecast and predict and to drive people down that checkout conversion funnel. At Gilt, actually, one of the things that worked really well to drive demand and drive people to checkout was that we saw when you're selling designer brands that people love at 80% off for 24 hours only in limited inventory, that really drives demand. But the flip side of that is it's very hard to predict and forecast. So at Zola, we were thinking about how do we still drive demand intent, but have a more forecastable business. And when it's more forecastable, it's more manageable. And the reason actually why we were excited about the wedding registry business and the model we were adopting is that for the most part, when people get married, you kind of you have to pick a wedding registry. And when you go to a wedding, you kind of have to buy off the registry. That is part of already demand that is going to happen by a certain deadline, which is your wedding date. And so that demand intent was built in to the idea of a wedding registry. And that was one of the reasons we wanted to do this. The other thing that was important to us was because people sign up for a wedding registry 7 months before their wedding date, and they start adding things to their registry, we can very clearly predict and forecast what we're going to sell 7 months to 1 year in advance. And then we can manage our business to make sure we have those items in stock available for couples when they want to ship them. And in doing so, have a better user experience, but also a better business model. And I think that solving the user experience and the business model together is what has allowed us to be successful in the wedding space.
Amazing. So I'm going to take you back in time, back to the very early days of the company. And I love asking this question because practically every founder I speak to has some kind of crazy story around this. So asking you about your first seed round and how that came about and what are your crazy stories on there?
Oh, I have some crazy stories. So I speak to a lot of founders and have really learned every seed round is unique and ours is no different. So our seed round was a bit different because I had worked at Gilt Group for 4 years before Zola and had worked very closely with the founder of Gilt. His name is Kevin Ryan, and he is a serial entrepreneur in New York. He founded Gilt, Business Insider, and co-founded Mongo. And he was excited to work with myself and my co-founder Nobu again. So when we talked about starting this wedding company, he said, I would love to work with you. I will give you the seed funding and we can just get started. And while many people are like, that sounds like a really good seed round situation, I will have to agree and say it was great, but it wasn't as easy as it sounds because it wasn't like it was just handed on a silver platter. The reason I had that opportunity to have that offer was because I had worked with Kevin for 4 long years, 4 very intense startup years, and I had essentially slugged my guts out for him for 4 long years. And that was the reason I got that seed offer. So while many people are like, oh, you didn't really raise a seed round, I'm like, I was raising it for 4 years. So that was our seed round. But the funny story is, when I was negotiating the seed round with Kevin, I was actually in Ireland because I had to go and get my visa because I'm from Australia. And so I was in Ireland, I was on a hike, and for those of you who are Game of Thrones fans, I was essentially at Winterfell, hiking, it was pouring with rain, there was no cover anywhere, and I was on the phone trying to negotiate terms with him. And we got there, but it was interesting.
And what was it like working with him as an investor and somebody that you were working with?
It's fantastic. And because I've worked with him now for close to 10 years, he has been essentially like a coach and a mentor and, in many ways, a very active investor and co-founder in the business. And so it's great to have someone who has operated at this point in New York for decades, who has seen many, many businesses, who can give me a reality check and do so from the operator entrepreneur perspective, which is very different from the VC investor perspective.
Yeah. Okay, so now coming back up to present day, where you've gone from negotiating seed rounds in the rain to raising $140 million. How has the pitch changed? How has it changed how you talk to investors? What mistakes have you made along the way? Any advice for these ladies?
Yes, I wish someone had told me in the early rounds what I'm about to share here, which is, in some of the later rounds, when I would pitch in partner meetings, which were inevitably, at that time, all dudes and maybe one woman in the room, like 20 dudes, one woman, I would always ask, do you see differences between the way I pitch and the way male founders pitch? And every time I hear a very consistent response, which is, guys come into the pitch, they bang their fists on the table, and they swear that this is going to be a billion-dollar business. They have no doubt that it's going to be a billion-dollar business, which is funny because every single guy has no doubt it's going to be a billion-dollar business. And women just don't really do that. And certainly I didn't. So my pitch, I have had investors tell me, you're just more modest and more factual and not really as aggressive as a lot of the male founders pitching. And so I've been thinking about this a lot over the years, and what I've tried to do is really verbalize externally during the pitch the conviction that I feel internally, but in the early rounds never had enough confidence or enough guts, I would say, to really be banging my fists on the table, because the thought in my mind at that point was always, there's a small chance it may not be a billion-dollar business. So I don't know if I want to say this, there's no doubt this is going. But it turns out that actually I feel very strongly about it, so I should just say that. And the funny anecdote here is more recently, I had a guy pitching to me that he was building $1 trillion business. I'm like, wait, are we there now? I guess so, but I have to upgrade my pitch.
So you've mentioned your co-founder a couple of times. How did how does the relationship work between the two of you? How has that changed over time? How do you complement each other?
Yeah, Nobu, who is my co-founder, is the best. And we love working together, and part of it is we have worked together for many years before starting Zola. And the reason we wanted to start Zola together was because we knew from our past work, we were able to create great award-winning products together. And there was something so rewarding and fulfilling about that we wanted to do that again. And so he is, I think, the best design thinker in the world. He is our chief design officer and leads product and user experience design. And in the early days, when it was just me and him, he would focus on product and design and creative, and I would focus on everything else. Over the years, he has continued to really manage our design vision and product rollout, and I've tried to replace myself more and more in each function that I was initially responsible for. But having someone that you trust fully, who knows you really well, who knows that your weaknesses and strengths has made all the difference in the world.
Amazing. Okay, so we just have a couple more minutes. So to wrap up, what's the one biggest piece of advice that you wish you'd known when you started that you can share with the audience today?
My advice to founders is always a piece of advice that I got when I was first starting Zola, and I think it was the most valuable piece of advice, which is before you really decide to commit to an idea for your startup, to think about how you are going to spend at least the next 10 years of your life focused on this one thing. And that's if everything goes well. But you are going to be living, breathing, working pretty much 24/7 on this one thing. And your most valuable asset is your time. So is this the best way that you want to be investing your time for the next decade? Because if it's not the best investment of your time, maybe you should think about another idea, another team, something else. But to really have a commitment to yourself before you bring anyone else on your journey. And once you're able to think about that and commit it to yourself that this is the only thing you want to be doing, then you're ready to go.
All right, Shan-Lyn, thank you very much. This has been excellent.
All right, hello everyone. My name's Adora. I'm one of the partners at Y Combinator. I have Reham from AptDeco, Alana from Bulletin, and Tiffani from the Human Utility. So today we're going to talk about, our discussion will be around essential startup advice. So I think there's a lot of actually good advice in books, articles, and even on Twitter sometimes. But they tend to be, I think, very generic and abstract in an attempt to try to make it apply to everybody as much as possible. So today I want to go over some of that common advice you probably see and dive deep, one level deeper into how it applies to these three folks and their startups and go from there. So the most common advice I hear all the time and I give all the time is make something people want. It's so common that it's almost the motto of Y Combinator. So maybe you guys can start off with introducing yourselves and what's the one-liner for what you're building. And how did you know, or why did you think it was something people wanted?
Hi, everyone. I'm Reham Fagiri, co-founder and CEO of AptDeco. We are a marketplace for buying and selling furniture based here in New York City. So if you're selling furniture, definitely check out AptDeco. Have to plug all the time. So the reason why I started AptDeco was actually out of my own frustration, trying to sell furniture on Craigslist. Had a really bad experience, realized that something has to be done to make it better and more efficient. So we are a one-stop solution. We take care of the pickup and delivery. We handle payments online. We verify everything before pickup. And that was the reason why we started it, is because out of my own frustration. Right.
Hi guys, I'm Alana Branston, co-founder and CEO of Bulletin. Bulletin is we work for retail space, so we build physical retail stores where direct-to-consumer brands can sell their products for a monthly membership fee. So we have 2 stores here in New York. The stores are actually filled with all female-led brands, so yeah, it's completely for women, by women. And yeah, when we started the business, we actually did not build something that people wanted at all. Like, it was a disaster. We started off with, it was basically like an Etsy competitor. It was like a cool, curated Etsy was the idea. We like literally didn't sell anything. It didn't work. And then we started talking to those users and basically asked them, okay, like what can we do that is helpful? Because this clearly is not. And figured out that they wanted access to retail space and how hard it was for them to get into stores. So yeah, we eventually built something people wanted. It just took a while.
Hey everybody, I'm Tiffani Ashley Bell. I am the founder and executive director of a not-for-profit organization called the Human Utility, where we essentially pay water bills for people that can't afford their own. We've done that for like 1,000 families in Detroit and Baltimore and a bunch of surrounding cities since. Thank you. It's not really we either. It's all you guys have donated. But you know, we've done that for 1,000 families since we started in July 2014, and it was more of make something people need, because we essentially crowdfund the money to help people. And I just read one day, I'm not from Detroit or anything like that, I just read about what was happening in Detroit, because I was actually working in City Hall in Atlanta, and I was just thinking to myself, like, what kinds of failures had to happen in City Hall where somebody just decided that if you're poor, we'll turn your water off. And I thought that was pretty crappy. So friends and I got together and just decided to, like, you know, we'll throw away $100 in a weekend on some shirt we don't need in a bad restaurant. So why not give that to, you know, people to help with their water bills? But it turned into like the whole internet wanting to do that. So I've been doing that ever since. So
Awesome. Okay, so another piece of advice is do things that don't scale. So give us one example of something that you did that wasn't really scalable, you had to do it anyway. And maybe it's related to how you got your first user.
I have a lot, so when we first started, I don't know how many people are doing marketplaces, but the big problem with marketplaces, they call it the chicken and egg problem, is you need to get, you know, content and also buyers. And so how do we convince people to actually transact on our platform? So how do I get furniture on the platform when nobody will trust that I actually am a real legitimate business, was the question that we were trying to tackle. So we were going on Craigslist. The reason why I actually built the platform was because of Craigslist, but we were going on Craigslist just telling people, hey, you should try AptDeco. You know, we are going to take care of delivery, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Some people, you know, were convinced enough to list, but the part that actually came out of one of my partner meetings at YC was, instead of having people, you email them and have them go list on your website, why don't you just list it for them? And so that was like, oh wow, is that even kosher? I mean, I don't think it is, but so we just started just going on Craigslist and literally just copying content from Craigslist to our site. And then there's a whole other story of, like, once something's sold, how did we get it to the customer? That's a whole different story.
Yeah, for us, we basically, when we were pivoting from this like Etsy competitor idea to the retail space idea, we really didn't have any money. I think we had $20K that we had gotten from YC Fellowship, and we're like, okay, how are we going to test like a retail space concept? And so my co-founder and I, it was just the two of us at the time, started doing these like outdoor weekend flea markets as a way to test the concept. So we literally rented out this like overgrown, vacant parking lot in Williamsburg. It was like a toxic wasteland. And we had all these brands come. We'd have like 40 brands come every weekend, and they would come and like set up their product and sell. And like it actually went really well, where like they were making a lot of money, we were making money finally. And we used that to basically prove that like, okay, brands will show up and pay for space, and like there's definitely better ways to do this. And yeah, it was completely unscalable, but it did like prove our point, which is good.
So we have kind of a two-sided thing where we have donors and then the people that actually need the help. And so If you follow me on Twitter, I'm sorry, but that's like the way that we got the initial donors. But we had all this money that kind of piled up as far as pledges go, and since we'd done everything on social media, we didn't know how to access or like get to the people that needed the actual money. But what ended up happening is just like we got really low tech, and we just like designed some postcards and sent them to people. And so like the USPS has like a way where you can just like target certain blocks and just kind of like say you want to send 500 postcards to this street, and it's like kind of gerrymandered the way it looks like. But like we ended up just kind of doing that and just kind of going from our database and just saying we have a lot of people from Detroit in this zip code that are applying, so why not just target that entire zip code? And we just started doing that kind of thing. So these people were not on social media, so we couldn't just keep tweeting for them. And actually, maybe I'll talk about it later, but the city wasn't helping us either, because they were kind of like, who the hell are you? So they were just, we didn't get help in that way. So we kind of had to like just hack it in that way. And it turned out to be a really interesting sort of thing to send out postcards.
So the next one is find 10 to 100 customers that really love your product. So how did you determine that people were loving your product? Like, how did you define that, either qualitative or quantitatively?
So I'll continue along the same story. So for us, once we started listing these products from Craigslist and trying to, we got our first sale and we were like, wow, okay, what are we going to do to actually fulfill this sale? Because these sellers don't even know that we've listed their product on our platform. So we were trying to figure out how to fulfill that order. So, the first time I tried, I'd email, hi, I'm the CEO of AptDeco. We sold your product on AptDeco and, we're going to pay you. And it just didn't work. Nobody responded. So then we just realized, like, hey, like, why don't we just pretend like we're a Craigslist shopper, go on their platform, go and just email them, like, hey, I'm going to buy it, and we just pay them in cash. And that's what we did. The most amazing thing that happened out of that is because we were actually visiting every person's home, we were talking to our customers, and we realized once we told them why we started the business, because once we got to their home, we would tell them, hey, this is, by the way, AptDeco, and this is what we do, et cetera. They were like, wow, this is amazing. They actually started telling all their friends. So every time we went and we were doing something very unscalable, 5, 10 people signed up as a result of it. So that was the genesis of sort of getting from 10 to 100 customers.
Referrals, basically.
Pretty much,
great.
exactly.
Yeah. And yeah, I feel like we have like a pretty similar experience where once we started getting referrals from brands, we felt like, okay, like we're doing something good enough that people are recommending their friends. I think we got lucky because our users, they're in this tight-knit community of brands, and so they all would talk to each other. And if someone sold in our store for a few months and they were making good money, like they're going to tell someone else in their community. And yeah, I think it was like when we opened the 3rd store and we just were able to like book it out immediately, and we like couldn't believe that people were paying like pretty healthy rates to sell in the store. And yeah, it was just like finally getting to a point where we were doing something right for the users.
Yeah, I mean, so the first, again, from donors versus people that we're helping. So the donor side was, again, just social media, and it turned into like the news finding out about us and then people signing up from there. And that became like me getting stuck in my apartment for like 2 weeks talking to press over and over again about what we were doing. Because it was kind of weird, if you think about it, to pay somebody else's water bill. So people were kind of fascinated with that aspect. But then as far as the people we helped, again, is the postcards, but then like, Facebook groups and stuff like that, So
let's talk a little bit about competitors. So the common advice is just ignore it. Your startup, startups are going to die because of suicide, not murder. So how do you guys think about competitors?
It's easier said than done to ignore them, for sure. But, I've learned through time now, where this is our 5th year in businesses, that is really the best advice, is to try to ignore them. And what I've learned over time is, just focus on the things you can control. And you can control delighting your customers. You can control making, a product that people want, and things of that nature. We've had competitors that have raised tons more money than we have to date even, and they've shut down. So it doesn't really matter at the end. It's all about the execution, and just focus on the things that will make you, compete in the market.
Yeah, I think we try and ignore them as much as possible also. I definitely have like my Google alert set to see like if when they announce certain things, and I think, we'll look to see how they're positioning their product in the market or when they're raising money. But yeah, I think like the more you can just keep your blinders on and look at your metrics and look at your milestones and keep your team looking at that and not be like, oh my God, they just raised $23 million. Like, what are we gonna do? It's distracting and it doesn't really help you in any way.
Yeah, so the not-for-profit sector is a little different. Because there's still totally competition. Like, it's not just this like, oh, everybody's like trying to help the world or whatever, because it's actually surprisingly cutthroat, which I learned kind of on the job. Maybe if you pull me afterwards, I'll tell you about certain mafia-esque phone calls I got from other organizations. I'm not even kidding. But like, just for us, it's been like learning how to like communicate the work that we're doing really well. And also just kind of pulling at people's heartstrings and like learning how to do the storytelling. And then also,
You mentioned you butted heads with the cities a little bit. Can you?
So what's that?
You butted heads with the cities a little bit, or they weren't helpful at all?
No, so I think when we launched, we embarrassed Detroit, which wasn't the goal. We just helped people when they didn't, and so they didn't. I mean, it's true. So they told people not to come to us for help because they're like, well, if you need help, come to us. But they weren't helping people. They were turning off cancer patients, for crying out loud, and this is the kind of stuff that was going on. But we got a call from a certain very big nonprofit. It's a national organization, and they saw us as competition, which was funny because I was still like operating this out of my bedroom basically as a fundraising thing. But it's just the principle that, we got more press. What we were doing was resonating with people more, and we could show actual like success stories. And we weren't like building 6 houses with hundreds of millions of dollars, and that kind of thing. So I think the nonprofit sector has competition still, but I think if you like show that you operate better, you're actually using the money for what you say you are, and you're like putting those success stories out, and then you're talking about like the systemic change that you're trying to actually kick off that actually resonates with people. Because that's the question I get all the time too, like how are you gonna do this? Like what's the long-term sort of plan? And for us, it's actually not to keep raising money, but it's actually to like have laws passed around water affordability and just kind of use like a lot of startup-esque principles to do that, so. Cool.
So it's often said that you shouldn't start scaling, as in hiring lots of people until you find product market fit. So maybe we kind of went over, we talked about referrals and stuff like that, but maybe you can go over, when did you know you should hire your first person? Who was your first important hire, and why did you hire that person?
Product market fit for us was when we decided to take on delivery and make it in-house. So when we started the business, we did not want to touch the furniture. We just wanted to provide the platform. A year and so into it, we were working with third-party moving companies. We realized that it's just the quality of service was not up to par, and they were just canceling jobs on us last minute. So we hired some guys off of Craigslist again and rented us a van. And that day, we had incredible feedback from customers. Fast forward, now we have over 10 trucks in the city. And what we saw was, as soon as we brought delivery in-house, we talked about referral, but really it skyrocketed. The type of referrals, the quality of service as well, the branding, also our metrics. We now understand our metrics very well. And that was really the basis for it. I mean, our first hire was customer service because it was all about delighting customers. And what I learned over time is, your needs as a business change over time. So our first hire was customer service, and that was at the time the most important hire. We fast forwarded a couple of years later, our head of operations and obviously our engineers, et cetera.
Yeah, for us, it took us about 1.5 years before we got to product market fit. Like we pivoted so many times and just kept taking like the little things we'd learn and use it for like the next version of the company we'd run. But yeah, it literally wasn't 1.5 years until we got to a point where we were opening retail stores, they were working, the brands were happy. And then to answer your question about the hiring, I think our first important hire is really what got us to like full product market fit in my mind. There was basically a point where we were treating the stores as like stores as a service, like any brand can come and sell their product. And so we ended up with this like crazy store where there was like Fitbit competitors next to blankets, and it just didn't make sense. obviously. And so we hired our director of product, Maggie Brain. She came from J. Crew, who just totally transformed the business. She's a merchandiser, and so she was able to really pick the right brands, pick the right products and price point, and I mean, the stores just took off after that, but it was like that final key hire before we were like, okay, like we can scale this, we're good.
Yeah, for us, product market fit is just like having people continue to support us, basically. So we've been trying to build a stronger recurring giving program. So that's still kind of in the works, actually, because like I had never run a nonprofit before, so I didn't know like what we should actually be doing and like what that looks like as far as success besides like changing laws. So we're still doing that. But as far as like the first hire we had, it was also customer service because like, you know, we had all these people that were applying for help that like I couldn't talk to them all on my own. We talk about stuff that didn't scale. I was turning into kind of like a social worker / therapist by like talking to everybody who, like seriously, like everybody who applied, I talked to them on the phone for at least 30 minutes, which was good in the beginning because like people were feeling heard for once. Because when you deal with a lot of people that are in poverty, the thing that's common amongst all of them is they get overlooked and ignored. And so I just listened to people more. But Kate, who used to direct nonprofits at YC, she kept telling me, like, you need to hire somebody because you're looking worse and worse every time I see you, and you can't, like, you can't do this on your own and like whatnot. So I actually, the spring of 2016, I'm an engineer, by the way, too. So like I took like a month off from everything else and just built out what became our case management system. And then that allowed me to actually hire the customer service person because they would have had the no Rails otherwise because all we had was the Rails console. But that was our first customer. I mean, that was our first hire.
Cool. Semi-related to that is when founders come into YC, we say, please remember to get some sleep and some exercise. So how do you guys stay sane while running a startup?
Yeah.
Or do you?
Still trying to figure that one out. Yeah, so this year at least I'm trying to make it to the gym more and travel. It's still work in progress, but definitely it's very, very important. And what I learned over time is, it's not about the number of hours, it's more about how productive you are. You can work 6 hours and be more productive than working 15 hours in a day. So I'm trying to still implement that, but it's very, very important.
Yeah, I think for us, I mean, it's something where it ebbs and flows. Like there's weeks where things are just completely insane and we're opening a new store and I just feel like very unhealthy and not okay. And I think the whole team gets that way sometimes. But yeah, I mean, I think when we do have like kind of a down moment, like trying just to really take advantage of it and just, not go into the office on the weekend. Running has really helped me. I know like a lot of people hate running. I used to, but for like just my mental state, like running has done wonders for me. So yeah, I know people hate it, but maybe try it.
I mean, so this is actually the end of my vacation this week. I was on vacation this entire week, which never happens. But the three things that I've been doing more is like going to therapy. I work with an executive coach that helps me like stay organized and prioritize and things like that. And then like something I started in the last couple months is acupuncture because it's helped with like energy issues and like actually getting me to sit down somewhere like during the business day. So those are really quick things.
I know we're over time, but I apologize, but I want to add in one more question because I think it's so important, and that is the advice is founder relationships matter more than you think. So can you talk about your relationship with your co-founder and how do you guys stay sane with each other and balance things?
So for us, I have a co-founder, and so my background, I'm an engineer, and he came from marketing and sales. So early on, we tried to create delineation of roles, and we butt heads still all the time, but at the end of the day, someone has to make the final decision because if it was always a democracy and we both have to consensus, we're just never going to move quickly. So what we do is, any product-related things, I essentially have the final say. Any marketing-related things, he has the final say. For example, we run Subway campaigns. I really did not want to spend the money, and he was like, well, we're going to do it. And we did, and actually worked out to be very well. But, I think this is the important thing, is creating that sort of making sure that you have a structure where you're able to make decisions fast and quickly. And conflict's okay, but you have to figure out a healthy way to manage it as well.
Yeah, I feel like I just got so lucky with my co-founder, Allie. Like, we have very complementary and different like skill sets and personalities. Like, I'm more introverted. I like to kind of manage things from behind the scenes. She is like the total opposite. She's like highly extroverted, amazing salesperson, amazing press person. And so we work really well together. And I think even from the very beginning, when it was just the two of us like working in my apartment, we just could kind of like stay in our own lanes. Like, I just knew what I was good at and what she was good at. And yeah, we worked really well together. And so yeah, I think when you're looking for your co-founder, even if it's not like she's the technical one, I'm the non-technical one, like I don't think it needs to be like that, but just looking at like different personality types and even soft skill sets, it really helps to have a little bit of a mix there, I think.
So my original co-founder couldn't go through YC with me, but she's like a very dedicated donor and advisor of the organization. But the next person that I think of that has been around just as long technically is the customer service person I hired, Mariya. I'm the fundraiser and the person that like does all the technical stuff, but she does the customer service, which again I burnt out on. But another thing that she's really good with is people. Like, I still labor under the belief that this is ridiculous. I have to do this as an organization. But she is just kind of like, okay, I'll call the city people and talk to them for you because I'm on the phone like, why the hell can't you do this or whatever? And she's patient enough to be like, I will talk to them. I will make this work for us or whatnot. And she's way better at that stuff than I am because I'm just like, to me, common sense, this shouldn't have to be a thing. But she's able to talk to people and kind of finesse them and whatnot. So I really appreciate that aspect of the work that she does.
Cool, awesome. Well, that's it. If you can give these three a round of applause. Thank you so much.
Hello, I'm Carolyn Levy. I'm a partner at Y Combinator, and I'm very happy to introduce our next speaker, Mariya Nurislamova. Her company is called Scentbird. I have one of her products in my purse. Please join me in welcoming Mariya.
Really bright and sunny today. I can't see the slides, but I guess that's okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Mariya. For the past 4.5 years, I've been building a company called Scentbird. Scentbird is a fragrance subscription service, and we help people date fragrances before marrying them. I'm really happy to be here today because Scentbird is, it's probably one of the hardest things that I had to do in my life, but it's also one of the most rewarding. And the YC community has been instrumental in helping me get to this point. So I'm really happy to be here today. Now I would like to take you, I guess, behind the scenes of how we build the company and some of the early mistakes we've made. And God knows there were plenty. So chapter 1 of our story, it's called The Year of Misery. I kid you not, that's how I refer to that time. It was the year where I think we read every book under the sun about building an MVP, yet we didn't talk to a single customer. I'm a huge fragrance junkie, so let me set the story straight. The company was built out of my passion for the category, right? I love fragrances. I hate shopping for them. When you walk into a store, like 1,000 fragrances in the air, the lady is spritzing something in your face, the pushy sales assistant. I hated that. The coffee beans don't work. Long story short is I had a dream. And that dream was, what if I could discover my next fragrance from the comfort of my couch? The one thing that was missing was a really good fragrance recommender or scent recommendation system. So my co-founders and I set out to build one. Took us so the first landing page was very quick, and I was the original person who recommended fragrances. I doubt I was really good at that. Then we brought technology on board, and I think we built like 6 different ways for you to discover fragrances online. This one feature, we call it Smart Search, but basically you can say, okay, like I want a fragrance for a workout that smells like oranges, and we basically got your back. The problem was we all decided as founders to quit our jobs, and this was the business model. Oh, wait a second, you cannot really monetize a recommender, can you? Because people are not going to pay you. I think it took us about 6 months to realize you cannot really monetize a recommendation platform. And then we had to figure out what is it that we can build that can actually charge people money for. And so the first idea was, well, why don't we build a discovery kit, scent discovery kit? So it was basically, it looked like this, if you can see. Basically 6 small little samples. People would pay us $9 for that. And the idea was that if they liked a scent, they would purchase a full-size bottle from us. Long story short, they purchased the kit. They never really purchased the bottle. So all we made was $9 off of like 100 people. Not really a billion-dollar business. So we went back to the drawing board. And mind you, this is we still haven't talked to one single customer about what is it that they really, truly wanted. So we're all still living in our heads. So, and this was a fun time for me because we're operating on a shoestring budget. I basically don't have a job. My savings are dwindling down. So I found this really fun hack. You know when you go to Sephora, they give you 3 samples for free? You know when you go twice, it's 6 samples, you can sell them for $9? It's an amazing business model, or not. So I feel like I literally went to all 12 Sephoras in Manhattan a few times a day. I asked my friends to do that. Not fun. They knew, like, I felt like sales clerks literally recognized my face. They're like, what is she drinking? The fragrances, I don't know. Long story short, we moved on to the new business model. So we're like, okay, well, maybe the problem with our first business model is that it takes an additional step for people to buy the full-size bottle. So why don't we ship them the full-size bottles right away? So we came up with this try before you buy model for fragrances. 3 full-size bottles of fragrances and little samples attached to them. We would just ship to people for free. Obviously, we would recommend them the scents based on all our algorithm and data. And they had 5 days to try the fragrances and ship the full bottles back if they didn't want any of them. So that was a really fun experience because we saw a 30% fraud rate on that business model. So we'd ship a box, and more often than not, it would not come back, and we would then not be able to charge somebody's card. So at the time, we were able to get into an accelerator program out here in New York called ERA, and they gave us $40,000. So basically, that's all the money that we had to play with. And I think we wasted about $20,000, which is half, on trying to make this work, and got very much in the red, got very upset. Saying that this was blood, sweat, and tears is really not saying much. So I think we came to a point where, let me skip that. We came to a point where I think we really wanted to give up. And that's where we come to chapter 2, the glimmer of hope. So you know when the going gets really hard, you call this one person who you hope is going to support you? So for me, that person was Michael Seibel. Michael is currently now the CEO of the Accelerator program at YC. At the time, he was just a successful entrepreneur, sold his company to Autodesk. So I wanted to call Michael to cry on his shoulder, basically. I was like, Michael, fragrances really suck. I don't think we can make them work. I think we're going to build a makeup company. And he goes like, wait, what? Mariya, you spent the last year failing at fragrances. You're telling me that you're going to go and build a makeup startup and spend another year failing at makeup? He goes like, makes no sense. No. If I were to put my money into someone or back a team that I think has the best potential to make fragrances work, it would be Scentbird. Something shifted for me, and I think sometimes we all need that one mentor to kind of like hold our hand through something when the going gets really tough. Michael also shifted my thinking a little bit because he said, Mariya, what if people are not looking for a signature fragrance? What if they would like to change fragrances like they change clothing? I was like, interesting idea. I hung up the phone. 2 hours later, we had the winning business model. And it was a fragrance rental, basically. So we said, okay, full bottles are not really working for us. We keep just losing money every time we try to sell full fragrance bottles of perfume. So we decided that we are going to rent, quote unquote, or ship people a 30-day supply of a designer fragrance of their choice for under $15. So basically, instead of committing to one full bottle, you can kind of get it in increments and build your collection. And we decided to make it a subscription. So we basically turned off all the fancy features on our site. It was a one-pager, really ugly looking with this ugly picture. That's why I have it up on the slide. And basically, it worked like magic. People paid us money first. We shipped them product later. Amazing. We got well, you can't really see the picture, but we got 105 orders in a span of a week. And for us, that was like, I've never felt this successful in my life. We're finally making it. Oh my God. Now, we had our 9 to 5 as like startup founders. If you can tell from the picture, that's me on the left, two of my co-founders. After hours, we would spritz perfumes, like literally trying to get them from a big bottle into a little guy until 2 a.m. every day. That's how we fulfill our first orders. These are the little guys all packed up and ready to go, all 105 of them. I counted. I took them to the post office myself. And then we get to the real fun part. The darkest hour, and that's chapter 3, the darkest hour is just before dawn. As our business was scaling, 100 customers is not really scaling, it's really early on. And we went through an experience of pitching a demo day at the first accelerator here in New York. Nobody really wanted to give us money. And I was looking at our bank account. I think out of the 40,000 that the first accelerator gave us, we had about 5,000. And e-commerce is a business that requires a lot of working capital. It requires a lot of cash. So I realized I would have to raise. And for the longest time, it was like the biggest disconnect because we were looking at this, and this is the rendition of like our first version of a Scentbird dashboard. You can hardly tell, but there are like literally 3 KPIs on here, and the most important one is how many orders a day we're getting. So we're getting 10 orders a day. For me, it's huge. It's like I'm making it. But the rest of the world does not really caught up to that. They're looking at my product, they're like, it's kind of ugly, would anybody want this, And a lot of investors are like, you know what, my wife doesn't use fragrance, I don't think you'll ever be successful. I'm like, okay. So I go ahead and I pitch people. I didn't count, maybe 40 people, everybody told me no, but the no's are not no's never really upset me. What upset me were the crappy yeses, and I'll tell you what those are. So I was pitching this one investor couple, they were angels, and I told them, hey, I'm raising $250,000 to get this company off the ground. Look, it's killing it. Clearly, 500 orders. Yeah, and they basically took me for a spin. It was like 8 meetings, send us this due diligence, send us that, like build a financial model for us. So I was legitimately thinking they were going to give me $250,000 after all of this work. And then we get to the close, quote unquote, to that last meeting when I ask them for the check. And they're like, okay, Mariya, we're going to give you $25,000. And they promised me a valuation that was 3 times lower than the lowest that I could accept at the time. And they said that they would also want 5% advisory shares in my company because they didn't think I was qualified to run this business. I walked out of that meeting and walked into another meeting. And it was probably even worse, although, I don't know, it depends. But it was a real estate investor, and he said, Mariya, Scentbird is awesome. I love your idea. How about you give me 10% of your company for free office space for a year for you and your 3 co-founders? I walked out of that meeting. I told both of them no, obviously, although at the time I was pretty close to actually saying yes to some of those deals. And then I went back to the only person who I thought would listen. His name is John. He's an angel investor. He does invest in e-commerce. But for me, he was a mentor, and I was always afraid to ask him for money. I would always ask him for advice. I'm like, John, how do you do this? How do you do that? And that was also the time when we applied for YC. By the way, it was the second time that we applied for YC. The first time we got rejected. It was fine. It was the wrong business model anyway. I would have rejected myself many times over. And basically, I came to John, and I said, John, Scentbird is raising $100K. I want you to put all of it, and I'm going to give you a good deal. And the reason you should do it is, A, we're growing like crazy. B, I'm going to get into Y Combinator in 3 weeks, and our valuation is going to triple. So now is the perfect timing for you to invest. So John wrote us a check for $100,000. And then that brings me to our next chapter, Y Combinator. Well, we applied to Y Combinator for the second time, and we didn't get in. So I had to call John back and say, John, so no, the company's valuation is not 3x, but by the way, we have another 500 customers, so you should be really happy because we're basically a rocket ship. And then I had to go back to the drawing board and start and keep raising money, basically, because we needed more working capital to build inventory. And one thing, though, I think I discovered with that experience with John is the rule of scarcity. Because all I said was, hey, I have $100K, and I want you to fill that whole $100K. There's no room for anybody left in that round. So what I ended up doing afterwards is every investor pitch that I had, I would come in and say, hey, so Scentbird's round is $150,000. I already have $100 in my bank. So all I have left in the round is 50K. Do you want to be the last 50K in? So I pitched 6 people in like funds, and I think I got 5 yeses out of that. So that kind of really gets you over that like 150 real quick. And so I think that the big lesson learned there is, if you're going for like $1 million, say you're really going for 1/4 of that, and then just keep oversubscribing. Eventually you'll get to that $1 million. Again, a lot of my mentors, a lot of my friends are, Y Combinator alums. And although the business was growing, I still didn't feel that the DNA of the company was there and we truly had the product market fit on some level. And so a lot of my friends were like, Mariya, are you applying to YC? And I'm like, what, a 3rd time to get rejected a 3rd time? I did apply to YC. And long story short, we got in. Hence, they invited me to speak here because, if I didn't get in for a 3rd time, probably wouldn't make it to this stage, but basically it was the best experience of our life. We moved out of California, and I really think it changed the DNA of our company. So hyper-focused on growth, not like yearly growth and quarterly growth, week over week over week over week. And when you go through that experience, you always feel like in your batch, every company is growing faster than you, and everybody's smarter than you. But by the way, you walk out with like the best peers and the best friends out of this. And the one thing that YC also taught us is to have true user interviews, to really try to understand what people think. And then this one funny one that stuck with me, it was probably one of the first ones, somewhere in the Palo Alto area. We met with this lady in a coffee shop. She wasn't a user of the product. And we were like, hey, we wanted to meet with you, see what you think about our product. She goes like, are you dying? Is Scentbird going out of business? Is that why you're talking to me? Oh, I bet you're dying. Don't die, please don't die. I'm going to buy 10 subscriptions. I'm like, what? She clearly cared, and that was like probably the first time when I truly realized we might just make it. Because when people are willing to like just pay you 10x, just like don't die, please, it's, you kind of know that you're building something that people want. And now chapter 5, life after YC, for most companies that kind of like end up making it, the bigger chunk of their life would be post YC, not prior. I kind of wanted to leave you with a couple of last thoughts. Some of the things that, I wish I knew, or I just need to remind myself. So the first one is surround yourself with 10x people. And what I mean by 10x, it's not like 10 times more people. So there is this basically, concept, like in more traditional industries, somebody who's really top of their game is just about maybe 2 times better than your average person. In startups, because it's like really out of the box thinking, really creative, top people, the creme de la creme, like the smartest people are 10 times better than your average person. And I wish I knew that when I started hiring my team, because I would always go for the cheapest person. Like, oh, you're cheap and you're kind of hardworking. Welcome to Scentbird, And I was like, well, I could have hired probably 3 times less people, just hired the 10x people, and we would have probably gone further ahead. So that's the one. 2, it's actually has been said before here today, have an audacious dream. And not just have an audacious dream, communicate it, kind of like come out. Tell the world that it is your dream, because when you do, you're helpable, right? So, and the world actually can get on board with you. I think as women, we do tend to be very shy, and that sentiment has been shared here today. Pronouncing the billion word is really hard, but I think we have to. I mean, I've heard pitches from men who are like, we're going to be 50% of this industry, like in 3 years, and I'm like, yeah, you really won't. But, as women, we kind of prefer to get there first and then say that we really wanted to hit that target. I think we have to start reversing our thinking and first kind of like setting that audacious goal, communicating it to the team, to the partners, to everyone, and then hitting it. Then last but not least, which is also a big lesson learned for me, don't take advice from people that don't have what you want. I don't know how many of you are building your companies. I certainly, when I got started, I felt everybody wanted to give me advice from, my mom, and I do welcome her advice, to everybody else, friends and family and everybody. And one of the conversations really stuck with me. So it was my successful friend. She has built a business, like a hedge fund, very rich. And so I told her, hey, I kind of want to build this tech startup in the fragrance world. And she goes like, have you ever worked for a fragrance company? Do you even know what, I'm like, no, I have not worked for a fragrance company, but I think I might just make it. And basically, she was she was very discouraging, and I'm really happy I didn't listen, because in that moment I was this close to going like, maybe I should apply to L'Oreal and like spend my next 10 years working for like $60,000 a year or something, and being really miserable at my desk. I'm really happy I didn't. So in other words, only take advice from people who have what you want in life. Just to like wrap this up. Scentbird has come a really long way. We're now a team of about 100 people. We're shipping fragrances to about 250,000 people in the United States. We are eventually going to expand international. We've raised about 25 million people, but $25 million, not people. Luckily. Yeah, and I think that a lot of what we accomplished is definitely thanks to YC. So if you guys are running companies and you haven't applied yet, I strongly encourage you to do so. It'll change your life. Thank you so much for your attention.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie. We're about to start a short break, and I have a few short announcements before we do. I help run admissions at YC, so Mariya, thanks for that plug about accepting applications. We are accepting applications for winter 2019. I'll tell you more about that in a bit. First announcement. If you know of any engineers looking to work at a startup, we recently launched something called workatastartup.com, where they can browse hundreds of jobs at YC companies. We're also throwing a live hiring event on July 28th, so you can check the site out for more information on that. Also, please submit questions for the YC Partner Q&A. That's right there at slido.com/FFC. Finally, like I mentioned before, we're accepting applications for the Winter 2019 program. The deadline for that is October 2nd, so you have a while. And the program runs from January to March of next year. You can go to apply.ycombinator.com for more information and to submit an application. If you have any questions about applying, you can find me at the break. We'll have 20 minutes. I'll just kind of be walking around. Or you can email me, steph@ycombinator.com. That's STEPH@ycombinator. And we will see you back here in 20 minutes. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. We're going to get started again. Please take your seats. Thank you. All right, everyone, we're going to get started again. The talks. All right. All right, so I'm just here to introduce the next speaker, Reshma Shetty of Ginkgo Bioworks, who Y Combinator funded in the summer of 2014. And I am delighted to also describe Reshma as her company is the first female-founded YC company to be a unicorn, which is just amazing. So here you go. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you all for being here today. It's a real honor to be around such an amazing group of women. I'd like to thank Sharon and Kat for inviting me to come talk to you all. It's a real honor. As Jessica said, I'm a co-founder of a company called Ginkgo Bioworks. For those of you who have never heard of us, we're based in Boston. We're about 200 people located in the Seaport district there, and basically we design organisms to spec. And you're probably wondering, what the hell does that mean? Basically, the best way to sort of introduce what we do is if you take a look at this picture, and you can see there's a lot of technology on this desk. And does anybody know what the most advanced piece of technology on this desk is? You're right, it's the plant, right? So this, believe it or not, is the most amazing piece of technology that any engineer can think about, right? This plant can self-replicate, self-repair, it can self-assemble, and it can do all these things at sub-nanometer precision, right? These are all engineering traits that any other engineering discipline can only dream about, but that biology does routinely every day, right? And this is why I fell in love with biological engineering and why I started Ginkgo, is because I wanted to be able to harness this power of biology to do great things. The other fascinating thing about biology is that it is, at its core, digital, right? You can program biology. So every organism, whether it's you or the plant or a bug that lives on the floor, is made up of A's, T's, G's, and C's. And the sequence of those A's, T's, G's, and C's basically dictates the behavior of that organism, right? It dictates what it's capable of. So if we can learn how to program that DNA, if we can learn the right A's, T's, G's, and C's to synthesize, to write, then we can program biology to do what we want. And so that's what we do every day at Ginkgo, is try to figure out how to program biology, how to design biology. So this was an article that came out a couple years ago now in Wired magazine. For all the Apple fanatics at Ginkgo, this was the most exciting thing ever, comparing our organism designers at Ginkgo to Johnny Ive, right? And this is what we think about, is how to design biology, how to make that process better, how to get smarter about it, how to make it more efficient. So you might be asking, well, why am I here today? Am I going to teach you all about biological engineering? Well, when Kat and Sharon asked me to speak, Sharon asked me to specifically talk about a little bit about scaling companies. So I happened to be at the YC, or the FFC conference a couple years ago, and there I talked a lot about how to start companies and sort of my philosophy about what it takes to really start a new company. And so today I'll talk a little bit about scaling companies. So one of the things that I think Jessica already alluded to is that 2 years ago I was at FFC, and she issued a challenge to the group, right? She gave a talk about how to not fail as a startup, and Jessica sort of posed a challenge for all the women in the room. She said, I want to see a female-founded unicorn come out of this room. Right? At the time, there's also obviously been a lot of YC unicorns, but they actually all had exclusively male founders. And so, as Jessica sort of stole my thunder, I'm really excited that in December we became another YC unicorn, and yeah. So really excited. If you had asked me 10 years ago when we started Ginkgo whether I would get to this spot today, I would have said, hell no. But, you know, there you go. Life takes you in unexpected places. And as a biological engineer, I'm just so excited about being able to put these resources towards the engineering of biology. What's even cooler about Ginkgo becoming a unicorn is that we are a unicorn that actually has some shot of making a unicorn someday. So maybe I'll come back in 10 years and talk to you about the unicorn we've made. So how to scale a startup. So this is something that I think about every day at Ginkgo. I'm the COO there, and so I think a lot about how to grow and scale the company effectively, how to execute effectively. And as I thought about what I could talk to you all today, I wanted to really focus on some advice that has been pretty prominent in the news recently for startups, but I think is a little misleading, actually. And that's the advice to not raise too much money, right? So there's been a lot of headlines recently about the dangers of raising too much money as a startup founder. And on one hand, it makes me laugh, right? I think founders should be so lucky to raise too much money for their startup, right? But if you actually dig in and look at what Sam and others are saying, what they're really talking about is being smart about how you spend that money. So I would actually advise raise lots of money. That's good, because as a founder, if you're working on your life's mission, if a little more money can make the difference between success and failure, then you know what? The extra dilution's probably worth it. So raise that money, just don't spend it all, okay? And so that's what I wanted to talk to you today. It was about this second part of how to raise a lot of money, but not spend it all. Because that's actually surprisingly hard to do once you've raised money. And that's what's leading to these headlines that are warning founders not to raise too much money. So after you raise a lot of money, you can sort of have a holy cow moment, right? And you're like, wow, these people who are apparently smart just handed me several $1 million to go build my company and work on my life's mission. One, are they crazy, right? And two, what am I going to do now, right? Is sort of the typical reaction you have after closing a round. And I think the other thing you then have is sort of an oh no moment, like, how am I going to pull this off, right? Now I have all this money, and so now how am I going to achieve all those goals I set out I promised I would. And I think, so you'll go through that, right? And you'll say, okay, and you'll get over it. But sort of even more possibly dangerously, your team will go through that too, right? And so they'll see all this money. Any DuckTales fans from when they were a kid? Your team will say, well, hey, we've raised all this money. Now we can do all this new stuff, right? And there's going to be a really big but unconscious pressure to go spend that money on stuff, right? All of a sudden, all of the frugality and scrappiness and leanness that got you to where you are today, there's going to be an unconscious pressure to sort of throw that out the window, right? And that's going to manifest itself in a bunch of different ways, right? So have too much stuff to do? Hire more people, right? Why not? Like, we have money. We can hire more people to go do all these things on our to-do list. Having a problem with a fellow team member? Well, go to HR. We should now have a beefed-up HR to go take care of those interpersonal conflicts, right? Have some annoying tasks that you don't want to do anymore? Oh, well, we should hire some administrative support to take care of it for us, right? And the problem with each of these sentiments is that in some level, they're all true, right? Like, you raise more money, you should go hire some people to do new things, right? That's why you were given the money in the first place. And yeah, like, HR is important. You should invest in that, and they should be a resource for helping people solve their problems. And yeah, you should try to operate efficiently by outsourcing tasks that are not important for you to do. But if you take this too far, right? And if your whole team takes this too far, then that's what leads to sort of a bloat in your company, both from your headcount size and in terms of your spend. And that's the kiss of death for a startup, no matter how much money you've raised, right? Because you get too big, you get too bloated, you spend too much, then all of a sudden the bar for how much more you have to raise, how much more revenue you need to bring in to pay for your team gets that much higher, right? So if you can figure out a way to raise money but keep the discipline, keep the scrappiness, keep the frugality, then that's really the winning combination when you're scaling a startup. So what does it take to make that happen? Well, I would argue that you need a Scrooge McDuck in your organization, right? You need someone who keeps everybody focused on what are the key metrics for growing our business, and how do we do that in the most efficient way possible. Efficient in terms of headcount, and efficient in terms of spending, right? And this is not an easy thing to do, particularly right after you've raised a bunch of money, right? Because there's going to be all sorts of pressure to go try to spend your way out of problems, right? But you've got to have the Scrooge in your organization who's pushing back against that and pushing for efficiency, pushing for scrappiness. If you're a female founder and you're taking on this Scrooge McDuck role, let me tell you, it's going to be a little bit harder for you, right? And that's because female leaders, like whether we like it or not, are subject to certain stereotypes, right? Like if you're taking on the Scrooge role, you know, you're definitely at personal risk for being considered the battle axe, right? The tough person who's saying no to everything, right? And who's an unsympathetic, uncaring leader, right? And that's just a certain reality. I wish that stereotype didn't exist, but you know, it does. And so you got to weigh that sort of personal risk to your own reputation and to yourself against the risk to your organization of not having somebody who's putting pressure on the organization to be lean, to be efficient, to retain that scrappiness, right? And so that's a decision you have to make, but ultimately I think your startup success is going to hinge on whether or not you have this pressure being applied, right? Because the more efficient you can be, the longer your runway is, the more optionality you're going to have as you go forward with your startup. So your goal is really to try to scale your startup, scale your revenues, scale your customer base, whatever metric by which you measure commercial success. Grow it without growing your headcount and your spend too much, right? And only you can really define like what too much is, but in general, that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to decouple your growth in your commercial success from your growth in your spend and your headcount. Okay. If you can crack this nut, this is a huge competitive advantage. No matter how much you raise, no matter what, this can be huge for your team. And the reason for that is that all sorts of problems scale with the number of people you have in your organization, right? So recruiting becomes harder, right? You have more people, it's harder to recruit top talent people when you have to hire twice as many people as you might otherwise have to. Similarly, you know, interpersonal problems, well, they scale with n squared. So if you have n people in your organization, you have n squared possibilities for conflict, right? And so a million different things get harder and harder as your organization grows. And so if you can, again, grow your business by whatever metrics are important, revenue, customers, eyeballs, whatever, number of GMOs you can produce, then you're just at a huge advantage relative to others. And you're building an inherently stronger, longer-term business. So how do you scale without actually scaling, right? That's a fundamental challenge, and let me tell you, it's not easy. It's one that I've been working on for several years now, and I won't pretend like I've totally cracked this nut. But it's a worthy problem to work on as you're growing your company. The best thing I've figured out so far is based on a conversation I had with Ali Rogani a couple years ago now. Ali is a YC partner, and he's in charge of the YC growth program. And I went and sat down with Ali, and I think this was probably just after we raised our Series C or something. And I was like, hey, what advice do you have for me, like as we're trying to grow our company and whatnot? And Ali told me about this concept of mission to metrics. And he actually later wrote up a blog post on this. So I'd encourage you to go read this if you haven't already. But Ali has basically said that as a leader of a company, your job is to map out the mission to metrics for your organization, right? So what's your mission? What is your organization all about, right? This is your purpose for your organization. You probably should already have this on the day you start, right? So at Ginkgo, our mission is to make biology easier to engineer. That was the first thing we figured out. Before we even had a name for the company, we figured out our mission statement, right? Your strategy, that's really your commercial strategy, right? How are you going to make money? How are you going to get people to pay you for what you want to do? How are you going to be a sustainable company in order to deliver on your mission, right? And so that obviously takes a ton of thought, right? And only you can figure it out. And honestly, your commercial strategy might change several times over the course of growing your company, even as you're in growth stage. And that's okay. That's totally fine. But you still need to have a hypothesis about what your commercial strategy is. And then finally, based on what that strategy is, you need to define your metrics. How are you going to quantitatively measure whether you're succeeding or failing at your strategy, right? This is hard, right? This is not a trivial thing. This is something that, like, even at Ginkgo, we continuously work on and refine over time, right? But if you can define that mission to strategy to metrics, and even more importantly, if you can explain it to the entire team, right? Make sure that everybody at your company understands this, then they can connect what they do every day to the metrics of the organization, to the commercial strategy, to the mission of the organization. It's a hugely powerful aligning force for any startup. And so I would argue, I would add one thing to what Ali said, right? So yes, how do you scale without scaling? Define your mission to metrics, that's huge. It's going to take a lot of work. It might take months or years for you to figure out, but try to figure it out. And then I would say that also make sure that your metrics include one other thing, which is that at least one of your metrics should be focused on efficiency, right? So instead of a total output, is it output per person? Is it, dollars of revenue per salesperson? Whatever your efficiency metric is, make sure that's included as one of your metrics. Because if you force your team to optimize on efficiency, then you're forcing them to think about what goes in that denominator, right? How many people does it take? How many dollars does it take to achieve your goals? And so I think this is a nice way to sort of encode a value system around efficiency in your organization, is by defining metrics around efficiency as part of your overall mission to metrics. And then finally, as I said before, you need the Scrooge who's going to be pushing that message across the organization day in and day out. Again, it's not an easy job, I know, because I have it at Ginkgo, but I think it's the one that's hugely important for the long-term health and success of your organization. And so this is what we've been doing at Ginkgo over the past few years. We figured out our mission 10 years ago. It's to make biology easier to engineer. Roughly speaking, our strategy in a nutshell is to try to aggregate genetic engineering R&D at Ginkgo. And our metric is thinking about just how much genetic engineering can we do per person at Ginkgo. So driving that efficiency as much as possible is incredibly important to our strategy every day. So with that, again, I'd like to thank all of you for being here today, and thanks to Sharon and Kat for the invitation.
So much, Reshma. Hi, everybody. My name is Holly Liu. I am a visiting partner at YC. And before I introduce the next panel, I just want to let you know that if you want to submit or upvote any questions at slido.com/FFC, you could do that. So you could upvote. This is for the partner panel later. We're going to have an AMA with all the partners from YC. So feel free to do that during this time. So I'm really excited to tell you about this next panel. It's really something that's unique that I don't think I've seen anywhere else but at YC. We're going to be doing an onstage pitch panel. So basically, I will be pretending I'm an investor, and we will bring a founder on stage. Why don't you come on up, Naira? This is Naira Masolam, Frontier 7. Why don't you give her a round of an applause? I don't know if you know what you've agreed to, but so I don't know anything about our company outside of just her name and the name of the company, so I'm going to pretend to be an investor. We have Adora over there, who is also a YC partner. And we're going to spend the first half talking, and then Adora is going to come back and pretend she is Naira, and she's going to re-pitch the company. All right? So sit back and relax.
Hi.
I'm Holly. Nice to meet you.
Naira.
We're going to pretend we're in a coffee shop. Usually that's what happens. So tell me about what you do. What does your company do?
So I'm the founder of Frontier 7, and we have built a virtual data scientist platform that enable non-statisticians to be able to understand data and make data-driven decision-making without ever having to have any background in statistics. We do that through building a smart infrastructure and technology that uses the automation of deep statistics, including machine learning, traditional statistics, and natural language processing.
All right. I have lots of questions because I'm an investor. And usually investors are not so bright. Apologies to all investors in the room. So when you say virtual dashboard, like how do I access that? Is it like on the web? Is it on my phone?
Yeah.
And who's using this? Are you selling it to a company or?
Yeah, so it's a virtual data scientist platform. It's a software that you can log in on any.
So I think I've heard about this. There's these things called virtual assistants, but it's actually a real person that's actually doing the work. So is it a real data scientist on the back end doing the work?
Virtual.
Virtual meaning like it's a real person doing the work, or?
No, it's a technology-enabled platform, and all what you do, the way you engage in the technology is in two ways. It's either you collect data using the technology, and then what happens on the back end, we're able to analyze up to 200,000 data, combination of data points in less than 10 seconds, and then within a minute, the user will have the results in their email.
So if you can think of like your best, like ideal customer, like who would that be?
Yeah.
Like, is it a company or is it a professor?
So we're B2B, we've launched, we're live. And our users currently head of insight teams.
I'm sorry, head of what
insights.
Insights. Oh, okay, so they're looking at insights or analytics within a company. So name me like the perfect B2B customer you would want. Would it be Salesforce, Apple? Like who would you want? Like
it would be a CPG company, multiple brands, where they need to figure out who their
name me a
consumers
company
are.
That you're like,
Unilever. P&G.
Unilever. Perfect.
Our platform is being right now used in a lot in concept testing, so it would be also in entertainment where they have the need to understand who their consumers are and why they're doing what they're doing.
Got it. So perfect. So I'm the head of data science or insights at Unilever. What is my question that I'm looking to answer that I would use Frontier 7 for?
You would want to know who your potential customers are that are currently maybe not purchasing or using your product. And you would also want to know why they're using you and not somebody else. And our theory around this, we're living in an economy of interest where everybody has so many options. And so brands need and companies need to know why their consumers are using them.
Okay, so you're mainly focused on why customer analytics. So, or is it something more general? Is data insights at Procter & Gamble, are they looking for something else?
Yes. So in the early, when we first launched, we wanted to experiment, and we had users across many industries.
Got it.
And we decided to focus on the consumer space, even though the technology can
but
transfer.
Are you answering the same question at every single company? Like, why do your customers use you? Because there's many products out there that predict churn, predict like revenue of some sorts. Are you focused on a problem in the same problem in each company?
It's the who, what, and why. Yes.
Okay, so it might be different questions that you're asking.
It might be different variables
But
then
and
we
every
would
company
run
has
analytics.
I see.
that
And every
would-
company has a different variable.
Correct.
Okay, so it might be different questions I have, different variables.
Correct.
And then you're much more like a BI dashboard that I have to configure. And does your team come in and configure it for me? And then I just...
Username and password, and that's it. Username and password, and then there is tutoring, how to use the platform. We do also onboarding, and then it's clicks, and you get your answers.
I see. And then, have you heard of this company called Tableau?
Of course.
Is it similar to that?
No.
This is a
We
mystery.
are.
We're getting closer.
Think of our platform as data ingestion, where survey meets SPSS meets Mathematica meets Tableau. Meets interpretation and getting rid of the idea of having somebody with data science expertise.
Whoa. Yep. Okay, I'm totally blowed over. I don't know, maybe half of what you said. So,
I mean it.
But like, so in terms of, I don't even know what to ask next.
Can I tell you why it looks crazy and why we're doing what we're doing?
No, because I'm still
Okay.
trying to figure out
Sure.
what problem is being solved, in the sense of, is it, because I can't, it's very hard for me to invest in something that I don't really, I don't really know. So,
can I answer that question of the problem we're solving for?
Yeah, if you could give me a very specific customer, like, so Unilever had that problem. Give me another, like Procter & Gamble, what kind of questions are they trying to answer?
Yeah.
And how does your product answer them?
So the problem is, and the issue that Unilever and many others are trying to answer, is that there is massive segmentation in the market. They collect the data. Those tools are not the ones that analyze the data. And they're horrible in visualizing the data. And then on top of it, you need somebody who has background in statistics to do it. The problem is, for the longest time, that worked when data was manageable. But we live in a different world now.
So does your tool do customer segmentation?
Yeah, automated. Click, unsupervised
okay. So you do.
learning.
Okay, now I understand. So, in terms of the customer segmentation, then what types, like, in terms of that, how far along are you? How many companies have you sold towards?
So we built an MVP last year. We had paid pilots. This year we fully launched. And right now we're up to 10 and hopefully 12 soon paying clients B2B.
And what's been like the largest insight that you have on that the customer, that you've delivered the customer? Because the reality is, a lot of these like customer segmentation tools, marketing will want it. A lot of people might own it, or it sits in BI of some sorts, and people all use the data.
The insight of the technology, or the insight I had?
The insight that your customers have brought, like something that you brought to your customer.
I think one of the aha moments for some of our customers has been that they came in with so many assumptions about how to segment the data and how the data is behaving. And it's often the case that your assumption drives the analysis, and the ability to give the users a tool that says, segment it in a click, in seconds, in how you want to segment it, and let us run unsupervised learning and tell you how the data is behaving. And then, because then you take away the fear and the defensiveness, and it has been, I think, eye-opening to many, in terms of saying, oh, like, I wonder why I ended up in different segments now.
I see.
Now I'm, that's
I
been,
see. All right, well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I know it goes by fast. Thank you. Why don't you stay up here, and we'll bring Adora up.
I wish I can record this. Can I?
Oh, wait,
okay, great.
Well, you're the investor.
I'm sorry.
The investor left
I'm
me.
so sorry. The new Naira. I'm sorry. Why don't you go ahead and take a stand over there? I think you can see us. Sorry.
Hi, I'm Naira.
Hi, Naira. I'm
Nice
Holly.
to meet you. Okay.
Thanks for coming in today. So why don't you tell me what you do?
So we build software that does automated customer segmentation analysis. And do you want me to tell you how it works? Or?
Well, I'd be super interested in like what some of your company, tell me how it works.
Okay. So companies send us all their data that they have, and then the first thing we do is we clean it, we organize it, then we analyze it, and then we output back insights about their customers. And for example, what their highest LTV customers and who should they target with their marketing budget, or maybe even more specific, like pet owners are their highest retaining users, so they should be focusing their product more, their next product features more for them.
Oh, I see. Can you walk me through like a specific, like if you have a dream customer, name what the dream customer is, and then walk me through like the customer itself? Like I think you mentioned pets, like was it with somebody like Petco or something like that?
No, it's like, for example, if you own a cleaning company, and you're trying to acquire a lot of these customers, and then you look at all that data, and so if a company that looks at their data by themselves, they're looking at usually the average customer. But we need to be more sophisticated, and we need to segment the customers out because each customer has different LTVs, has different CACs, and so you need to recognize that. So, for example, I would put the data into Frontier 7, and then I would output that. I would probably see that pet owners are higher retaining, they're better customers, and I should go find more of them.
Oh, I see. And can you decide what attributes outside of LTVs and your CAC? Like, can you do it based off of gender? Like how free is this stuff?
We can do thousands
flexible?
of segmentations.
Oh, do I get to choose, or do you tell me?
We will tell you what to choose.
Ooh, so what's...
It's automated.
It's automated. So you will actually tell me something I don't know about my customer.
Exactly.
Okay, so it could be like people with highlighted hair like my product more.
Yeah,
and
like if you like NASCAR, are you more likely to buy their product or not? We can do all those likelihood scenarios.
So
which, by the way, the reason why this is so important is because, to do this, historically, it means you have to hire, either you outsource it to a big consulting company, which it takes forever and you spend a lot of money on it, or you hire an in-house data science team who has machine learning experience, which takes forever, and it's for most people, it's not their core competency. And so, the future is having a data scientist in a box. You just outsource everything to us.
I guess we're all becoming in a box. So how much revenue, how have you seen this impact the bottom line for people? Not just cost. I'm interested in increasing my LTVs or even lowering my CAC, obviously, as business. My other portfolio companies would want this.
The immediate impact is definitely cost savings, but the big impact is lift in revenue. And so when you target customers the right way, you obviously get higher conversions and you get higher revenue. I mean, we can go in circles about this, but yeah.
So do you guys do any of the selling of the channels for us or no?
What do you mean?
Meaning, now you know that people who are pet owners will use your cleaning service more. So will you go out and find me those people for me? Or does it just stop?
So we will suggest new product features you can build into, in your app or whatever it is, your website or whatever you have. So we can do product insights as well, but we don't actually build the product itself.
You won't do I see. You're just giving me the insights. You won't do the work. We have to do the work.
Yes, you have to do something.
So how far along are you? How many customers are buying your product? Not you, sorry, your product.
Insert. I'm going to make up numbers right now. We have 100 customers. We're selling mostly to enterprise right now, and they're paying on average $25K in MRR, annual revenue, ARR.
25K in ARR?
Yes.
Okay. And what's your plan to kind of help it grow?
Oh, so we have a pretty good sales pipeline. Basically, we do the traditional enterprise sales. We have a bunch of emails, we get intros, or those emails convert, and then those people.
But you're not using Frontier 7 for that?
Haha. I am secretly, yes.
So what kind of customer segment did you find most helpful for Frontier 7?
Sorry, can you say that again?
What kind of like customer segment have you found most helpful for Frontier 7? Like what types of people want your product the most?
Well, I think to start with, for us, it's easier to sell to companies who already actually have a data science team, and so they're actually serious about it. And then also customers who are open to using new products, or early adopters, I guess, is what you say.
Oh, so you're probably mainly starting to sell with startups.
Startups, exactly.
And the tech startups.
Big startups.
I see. And then in terms of like how big do you think this market is?
So, I mean, we can do top-down or bottom. I mean, top-down, you would just look at data science in general, and that's a huge $1 trillion. I don't know how much is spent on that. But bottom up, I mean, if we're making on average 100K like ARR a year, or actually, you said 25K ARR. Annual license, okay. So, well, let me back up a little bit. Like the first thing that our product does is just cleaning the data and organizing data, which is actually,
right, I don't know if I believe that. I usually have to outsource that to like Mechanical Turk or something. So you guys actually will clean the data.
Yeah,
Are you having people on the back end, or?
No, it's all automated.
Huh? All right.
That's
Go on.
That's why we're going to be a unicorn. Data scientists actually spend, I would say, 60 to 80% of their time actually doing that work, collecting the data and organizing and managing it. And they don't really get time to actually do the actual data science. And so I think there's actually $1 billion business doing that. I mean, if you say data scientists, like we can charge around 100K ARR a year for just that service. There are about 10,000 startups out there that can use us, so that's $1 billion in revenue already just from that piece. But I can layer on the other pieces, like the analysis and the automated insights.
I mean, if this is such a big and common problem, like why you? Like what makes, like you're right, data cleaning is really difficult. Like what's so special about your algo and how good is it?
Well, it comes down to team. So I am a professor, I believe, in...
I've spent 15 years in the analysis space.
Got it. I have 15 years of experience doing exactly this, and I first did it very manually initially. I was doing consulting for a lot of these companies, and so I've learned over the years what can be automated and what cannot, and so we're taking the first piece of automation. I'm also a professor at NYU, at Columbia, and teaching exactly this stuff. And so
You literally have written the books on it.
I'm literally the software.
So that is...
And scale to millions. And right, I'm literally, yes. And to scale me, Frontier 7 is scaling me to everybody else.
All right, I think with...
So I'm raising $1 million right now.
Okay.
Are you... what do you think about the space? Are you interested in investing in this?
So I definitely think data is a problem. I get emails way too many. Can you do anything about my emails? Like, that's a problem. Can't data science clean that too? Can Frontier 7 clean it up?
We're very focused right now on real data. I might suggest you a virtual assistant at the end of the coffee.
Okay. Well, so you're raising $1 million. How much have you already raised, and what's kind of the timeline that you're looking at?
We raised about half of that, and we're hoping to close next week.
I see. Oh, next week. Oh, okay. All right. Do you have like kind of more information? Could I go talk to some other team members? Do you have a deck?
You're welcome to talk to my co-founder. I'm the technical founder, though, so you can, since this is a technical product, you should just ask me. But I'm happy to give you a customer reference. And
that would be great if you give me a customer reference, and we could follow up via email.
Sure, great.
All right,
thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sharon Pope. I'm the head of marketing programs at Y Combinator, and it's my pleasure to welcome back to the stage YC's partners. Come on up. Kat Manyalik, Kirsty Nathu, Adora, Holly, Jessica, and Carolyn. I'm going to stand over here. This microphone. Oh, this one works now. I'm going to stand. Okay, so just as a quick reminder, as I unlock my phone, please submit your questions at slido.com, slido.com, and the event code is FFC. So you can also upvote questions. So if you want to kind of try to prioritize what questions get asked, these are your questions. This is your time to ask. All right, okay, so first question. Will YC ever open a New York City office? Carolyn, I'll send that one to you.
Kirsty's the CFO. You know what I think? I think that we never say never at Y Combinator. And as somebody mentioned earlier, I can't remember, maybe it was Kat, we experiment a lot. So it could be that in our future we have an experimental NYC outpost, or maybe in a different city. But I think that we like to try things and see what works. And if it doesn't work, we don't do it again, but it's always worth a try.
Please, though, don't start any rumors or get your hopes up. This is just, the point is we never say never. There are no plans.
That's true. There are no immediate plans to do that. So yeah, but yeah. Sorry, there are no plans to do that.
One thing I'll add to that is that I meet a lot of founders all over the world, and at this point in time, I still think it's helpful for any founder from anywhere to spend 3 months in the Bay Area and get to build that network. There's so many investors there, so many other founders, and then you can stay there for that amount of time, and then theoretically, if New York is where your customers are, move back to New York. But at this point, it is still so much easier to raise and build that network there. So even spending a short amount of time, I think, still helps. So.
All right, and speaking of building your network, one popular question is, I think a few people have talked about finding people who are 10x people, right? So those people who you hire and the people you surround yourselves with that are just over the top, really great mentors and peers. So how do you go about building that network? How do you find that? And how did you find the ones in your lives? I will throw that one to Jessica.
How do you surround yourself? How do you
find the kind of excellent people that will help push you forward?
I mean, I think I can think back to what we did 13 years ago, because, by the way, we didn't know anyone in Silicon Valley, and we had to meet people and grow our network. And I think if you're working on something interesting, then people who are really good will themselves be interested in it. And if you sort of genuinely want to talk to people and get advice, I mean, most people in Silicon Valley are pretty open to it. But I think just working on something interesting and being insightful about what you're working on makes for fascinating sort of conversation, and people like that.
Yeah. What about, Holly, maybe you could answer also when it comes to building a company as a founder.
Well, I'll throw out a fun story about a different YC founder, Eric Migakovsky. He was the founder of Pebble, and he came from Canada. And most people don't obviously have a network in Silicon Valley, and that's why they join YC, and that's why you should join YC. But he came down, and he was working on basically trying to fit like an entire computer processor in this tiny little form factor. And the early Apple computer designers were like writing this blog, and it was like a really nerdy blog, and he followed it, and he sent out a note to the founder, and he's like, yeah, I'll meet with you for coffee. And I think, as Jessica said, that there's a lot of kind of paying it forward culture, particularly in Silicon Valley, which is another reason why people do like to have you come out there. And it's weird, investors don't like jumping on a plane. There's a lot of things they don't really, and they like to meet you face to face still in many ways. So it's really good for that. So, but piggybacking off of Jessica in terms of that, definitely start finding people that you look up to that are in the same field. And I think you can reach out to them in terms of like, hey, I want to ask, if you can ask specific questions, that's actually very helpful. Because on the other side, in general, I think people are looking to help. But if they're just like, hey, do you want to meet and just have coffee with me? It's really hard because you don't know on that other side how busy they are. It'll just be they'll be more appreciative of it if they're like, hey, these are the questions I'm looking to answer and what your background can give to me. And then obviously sometimes, you'd be surprised, but there are also things that you can give as well. Like you are the expert in, well, Mariya was expert in scents. Like there would be nothing I would be able to tell her around that. And she could give me some interesting insights into that might be helpful for what I'm doing in my business. So don't discount yourself either.
The one thing I'll add is you can always just go work at a startup from someone that you admire and work directly with the founder. And I think that's a good way to get some meaty time with somebody.
Awesome. Also, a lot of people wondering about tips on how they can find a co-founder. Adora, while you're talking, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, my co-founder was my brother, so that was easy.
Easy?
Yours was, yeah.
Well, I was going to say one of the things to be careful about is I get a little nervous when people say, how do I find a co-founder? Because one of the things that we stress is that you don't actually go out and find one. You probably look within your own network, and the founder relationship that you form is probably more of an organic one. So college friends and old friends from your prior life, like people that you know pretty well, people that you're close to tend to make the best founder teams.
Yeah, usually it's someone you spent a lot of time with in college or at work. I think those are the two most common ones.
Awesome. Question of just generally, are there startups that YC wants to fund more than others? Are there areas that YC is extra interested in?
Female-founded startups.
All right.
There's also the request for startups page where we list like, hey, we'd love to see startups solve, diversity, create 1 million jobs, voice. If you don't have one in that area, it doesn't mean that we won't accept you. And even if it's just these are things that are interesting, and we put a call out for them.
And that's ycombinator.com/RFS. And yeah, I think some of the most interesting ideas we fund are things we wouldn't have thought of ourselves. I know when Airbnb came through, Jessica and Paul thought the idea was crazy, right? So we, I think, yeah, as Holly was saying, just because your idea is not on that list doesn't mean we're not interested in it.
I think also just no idea is too crazy for us. Like we'd never think an idea is like, oh, that's crazy, we'd never fund that. Like we just don't have that thought.
Yeah. And Kirsty, could you answer, is there a level of startup that YC is mostly looking at in terms of stage?
So we think we can be helpful to any startup up to Series A. So that's like a really big spectrum. We have companies who come to us with just an idea. We have companies who come to us who are already generating revenue. We have companies who are already profitable. We have companies who've raised maybe $1 million or $2 million in seed funding. And because we work with each company in a very specific manner to them, we help them with what they need, we can be helpful in all those stages. And so I think the important thing is let us make the decision about who we want to fund. If you say, oh, I'm too early for Y Combinator, I'm not going to apply, you're not even giving us the chance to see your company. So apply. You have nothing to lose. And it means that we can see and we can apply our expertise to see what could be amazing about your company.
Awesome.
And if you've applied before, please do apply again. Is it like over 50% of the batch has applied before? I think the number's like creeping up. Now I'm throwing out numbers.
And we heard from Scentbird earlier. Scentbird got in on our third try. Kat, would you answer just generally what YC is thinking about and what efforts YC puts forward to grow diversity within our founder population?
Yeah, this is something I'm super interested in, and we've all had the pleasure of working on at YC. For female founders, for example, in this batch of YC, so summer 2018, 27% of the companies in the batch have a female founder. One of the challenges is only 23% of the companies who applied had a female founder. So we try to do as much as we can to support female founders even outside of the YC network. So we do Female Founders Conference, hoping to connect with women who are starting companies already or inspire women who haven't started companies to start them. We do office hours with female founders. We also do office hours with Black and Latino founders to encourage them to apply. What else? During the batch, we connect the women in our batches to female investors prior to going out and raising money, just so they can get advice from women who've seen a lot of founders come to them, seen a lot of female founders, can give them advice. Is there anything I'm missing? And yeah, so I think hopefully over the course of the next few years, we'll see that number increase of women in YC. And I think on Jessica's slide, I think it's a total, we funded, how many? It's like 358 women so far.
Yeah, that's great. Fundraising question, so maybe Kirsty grab the mic, but anyone else to chime in. Just the question of when to raise. Like, how do you know when to raise, whether it's seed funding, and then also maybe thinking about that Series A?
Can I just say one thing on this? Raise money when you don't need it. Like that's the best time to, but don't wait until you only have like 3 months runway. We have, believe it or not, a lot of startups that come to us and like, we're running out of money. We have, 4 months in the bank. And we're like, what? You're going out to raise money with only 4 months of runway? Like, it's just creates disaster. So, sorry, I've been thinking about that lately, so I wanted to put that in. Go ahead.
So I think it depends who you're raising from as well. Usually the first money that a company will raise will be from individuals who are investors. And at that stage, when you're talking to those people, then it's usually because they're either super interested in the space that you're in, or you already know the people and they know how amazing you are as a founder. And so at that stage, it's easier. Fundraising is never easy. But it's easier to raise on an idea that doesn't necessarily have traction and growth. As you then progress and you're talking to institutional investors, so VCs, some of the larger seed funds, that's the point where you need to be able to show that people want what you're making. And by the way that you do that is that you show that there is growth in users, that there's growth in revenue, that your churn is at a manageable level. And that's how you start to then paint the story of this is how this company becomes a billion-dollar company. And so depending on the stage that you're at will depend on who you talk to, how you talk about your company, and the types of money that you raise. It's also it's very easy to fall into the trap of raising too much money if you're one of the lucky people that have a relatively easy time fundraising. So also think about how much money do you actually need to get to that next milestone? Because when you get to that next milestone and you're raising the next amount of money, it's going to be at a higher valuation, in theory. And so, the dilution that you're taking as a founder will be less because the investor's putting money in at a higher valuation. Whereas if you raise a bunch of money really early on, that's likely to be at a much lower valuation, so more dilution to you as a founder.
Got it. So Adora and Holly, maybe for this one. So speaking of traction, what are some examples of what counts as traction for a B2C company? And the acknowledgement that it varies by business, just kind of some principles that you might gauge this by.
I guess we both thought consumer companies. So mine is a gaming company, and it might be a little unique in terms of traction because it's usually very much like hits driven. So it's either a hit or it's not, and needs to get into the top 10. But in terms of early on, when we were just starting out, in terms of traction, it's really weird because it's a little bit of an art and a science. I can't really say like this is the exact number, but for sure, just like Mariya had with Scentbird, you're like 105 orders, we are onto something. So the first little seed of traction is almost to prove to yourself that you are onto something. And then the next seed is about like proving it to others. Once you're in YC, we usually kind of push you to say, if you're growing 10% week over week, that's really good. Because that means that, you have the traction. And then exponential growth, it's very hard to do in your head, but pretty much by the end of the batch, you'll have grown 10x if you do 10% week over week. So that's usually something that is like, okay, we'll keep on pushing that. And if you can get to that thing, then you're like, oh yeah. And for other investors, they'll be like, well, if you want to go more, that's really good. But 10% is pretty good in terms of within the batch. So if you're almost getting into that inflection point, it might be a good time to really figure out how to focus and get to that growth and that product market fit, which we can help at YC.
Yeah, for consumer companies, I think there's two there's various types of metrics in terms of growth that you can focus on. One is just user growth. Another one is revenue growth, just depending on what you're doing. So if you're building a social app, you'd probably focus on users, versus if you're building an e-commerce app, you would obviously focus on revenue more. The thing to watch for while you're growing, if you're growing really fast, is to pair it with, by observing something like retention and engagement, to making sure that you're growing the right types of users or the right types of revenue, because if you're bringing on what I call bad customers or bad users, they're going to churn. If they churn right away, or they're just not good for the product, and you have to just fire them, it's like a waste of time almost, and that growth is kind of just fake growth at the end of the day.
Great. So as an engineer / designer building a product, between prototype and beta, what are the pros and cons of launching before trying to raise money?
You should always launch before you raise money, but I don't. Yeah, I think you should launch as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Well, I think you can launch as soon as possible. In our industry, we always say you never know if you're polishing a turd, because you could be sitting there and you can be like, oh my God, this is the most beautiful thing, and then you launch it and you realize nobody can find the sign up button. Nobody even wants to click on your sign up button. Nobody even wants to open up your email, and then you realize you have much bigger problems than what you thought you were solving. So I'm a huge fan of trying to launch as early as possible. And even, let's say, it's going to take a while to build, there's certain things you can do even before that. You can start talking to your customers. You can start building a wait list of things. You can start doing, there's always things you can be doing, but the most important thing is to launch as early and as often.
Yeah, there's two ways to think about this. One is, if you don't launch, then you don't know if you have a product anyone wants, and why raise money for that? Like, where's the confidence in that? Like, if you launch, then you'll have some confidence around that. And also, there's a big difference in terms of how much you can raise and evaluation you can get if you have users and revenue versus if you have absolutely nothing. And so I think launch now, even if you're an engineer, like, if Shopify is going to be the fastest way to do it, then just do it. I know some engineers are just like, they're just embarrassed that they have to use Shopify to get it out there the fastest, but that's the thing to do.
Got it. Question, a mother-related question, which falls into the category of things that would never be at a male-oriented conference, if there are those. But how do you, for the folks who have kids, how do you factor in decisions to have children with some of your work goals and your ambitions in your own careers? And it was a popular question, so I figured we'd ask it, even though, it can be a tough one.
I never did factor it in. I just worked on YC, then Paul and I got married and had our son right away, and we just plowed right through it. I never sort of planned. I wasn't very planful at all, which in hindsight is, sometimes I wish things were different, because as YC was growing and I was working so hard to make it succeed and it was so time consuming, that's when I was having babies, and I barely took any maternity leave. I just worked through the whole thing, and maybe I should have been a little bit more planful, but it's hard, Don't put it off for too long, would be my other advice.
Yeah, I would echo that. So I came from a law firm before I was at Y Combinator, and I have nothing but sad stories of colleagues who didn't have children because they wanted to make partner, and I just don't have any happy stories from that era. I'm kind of like Jessica. I just thought life goes on, and I'm having children. So I had children while I was at a big law firm. I do want to mention, we have a lot of great anecdotes about parents at YC. And one of my favorites is that we had a female founder apply, and she was at Y Combinator for her interview, and she ran out to go breastfeed her newborn in the car. And we accepted her, of course, and she's great. So anyway, yeah, we have lots of stories like that. And I guess this kind of sounds cliche, but I kind of think you got to live your life, and there's tons of examples out there of women who are having children and having a startup, and a startup is like a baby, so it's just like you have another baby.
I love that.
Yeah, so when I got married, 5 months later, I told my husband, I'm basically, I'm leaving to start this startup. And he's like, what? And I think it's a very personal and tough decision as to whether or not you want to have a kid. Some people know right away, and some people don't. And I knew this was something that I had wanted, and now I can't take it back. No undo. Just FYI, if you do think about it, it is a big decision. Sadly, I will be honest, I do think women have to also think about a biological clock. For me personally, it took longer than we had expected. And we had, like, there were just a lot more extra things we had to do at the same time trying to do this startup. Luckily, my startup was probably pre-series, like probably Series A, Series B. Definitely by the time my kid came around, we were doing quite well, Series C. But the whole impact of even thinking about having a kid, honestly, it impacts you almost when you turn 7, 8. It's just so young, this kind of thinking about this thing. I don't think guys think about this as much as women, and there is the reality of a biological clock, but there is also a lot of great things in science. We have some wonderful, we have carrot fertility that can help you, extend some of that. And I think maybe me and Jessica would, and maybe even Carolyn, we might have been. I was definitely considered what is it called, geriatric pregnancy?
Yeah, yes, if you're over 35, you're advanced maternal age, which I was.
Yeah, me too. My second one, they gave me this pen or something. I don't know, it was terrible. But it is very much as for all the parents out there, a startup is like having a kid. It's so cool that you did it with your husband. I feel like I had a kid without my husband, so it feels like I was having an affair all the time. It's always kabam, Holly. It always comes first. I'm like, I'm sorry. But if you can surround yourself, don't refuse help. I mean, it can be done. And there's many YC founders who have done it at various stages, all the way from interview, all the way to, when it's a lot larger. Reshma's one of them. She's going to go through it.
Reshma, due in August. Woo!
So it's very plausible. There's definitely some more tactical things. If you do end up hitting at that point, think about a plan. When you leave for temporarily, definitely have the communication. I'm a huge fan of keeping the communication lines open. And I'm only going to say this because this came up within the YC community. Your options should vest on maternity leave. I was just shocked, but there was a whole discussion around that in our.
Really?
Yes.
Somebody's option vesting suspended during pregnancy leave?
They didn't suspend it, but the other founders had suggested that. They're like, since you're going on maternity leave, we'd like to, would you consider suspending your options? Don't.
Yeah,
no,
never
that is
ever agree to that.
Borderline illegal too, I feel like.
I actually think that is legal.
Sorry.
So just one more question. We've talked about doing things that don't scale. If you're doing things that don't scale early on, how do you convince an investor or someone else that it eventually will scale?
Well, you just need to have a product plan in place. And so any investor should know at this point, especially if they're a tech investor, should know that something repetitive software can most likely replace. And so I think it's usually good to have a little bit of software to have automated some piece of what it is that is not scaling. And also at every stage of growth, there's a different way of doing things. And so as long as you're able to explain, well, in this stage, I'm doing X. In this next stage, I'll be doing Y. And then in the future, this is my plan for the future, but at least I have the next few steps in place.
That's great advice. Thank you very much, YC's partners.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
And Kat has an
All
announcement.
right. I have a couple quick announcements before we wrap up. I wanted to thank you all for spending a Saturday with us. We're excited to meet even more of you at the reception after. We're doing a reception at the Malt House from 5:30 to 7:30. And I also wanted to thank some of the folks that made this event possible. Where's Dominique? Are you here? Hi. Dominique runs events for YC. Thank you. And thank you for everyone else on the YC team, Sharon, Stephen, everyone here who made it happen. Oh, and Adele, yes. Thank you, Adele. And then also, I wanted to mention that Google Cloud and AWS are offering free hosting credits for everyone here. And so keep an eye out for an email from us if you would like access to those credits. And then also thank you to DigitalOcean, who hosted our office hours yesterday. And that is all from me. So thank you so much for joining us. And I hope to meet you guys all at the Malt House.